Welcome, and thank you for joining today's conference, Regional Issues Forum Meeting. Please note that all audio connections are muted until the Q&A portion of this call. We will give you instructions on how to enter the Q&A queue at that time. Please ensure you've opened the chat panel on the bottom right of your screen. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you can send a chat message to all panelists. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. With that, I'd like to formally turn the meeting over to Kathleen Colbert. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Silas. Hello, and my name is Kathleen Colbert. I'm from Vistra, but today I'm participating in the RIF in my role as the IPP and Marketer Sector Liaison, one of those. Lindsay Schleckaway and I will be the moderators for today's meeting. The Liaison Committee is organizing this peer-to-peer stakeholder discussion to discuss the Joint Authority decisional items we anticipate to be held at the February 1st, 2023 Joint WEIM Governing Body and CAISO Board meeting. We would like to note that this is our best understanding of the Joint Authority decisional items at this time. While we don't anticipate any changes, we did want to just make a public service announcement to double check the final agenda that the CAISO will post for the WEIM governing body, the joint session, and the CAISO board meeting for the final agenda items and timing for these meetings. We would like to thank all of the speakers for participating and providing your perspectives on management's, CAISO management's upcoming joint authority proposals for governance, day-ahead market enhancements, and the extended day-ahead market enhancements.
The overarching goal for this stakeholder discussion is to walk away with a fuller appreciation that while each of us sit at different seats at the table with our own unique views, that we will better be able to appreciate the various nuanced views among our colleagues seated at the table with us. To provide a little context into the structure for today's meeting, each speaker will be given 5 minutes to be able to present their perspective on the discussion topic at hand. Once the speakers have finished providing their perspectives, then we will open it up for stakeholder discussion about the perspectives that we just heard. This stakeholder discussion should include clarifying questions to the speakers, but also expression of your own individual perspectives on the topic.
We intend for this peer-to-peer discussion to be a platform upon which stakeholders can hear each other out in a constructive manner, recognizing that we may not share an agreement on each topic or any of the topics. However, we may learn from each other to gain new perspectives or at least gain an understanding of where others are coming from. In order to accomplish this goal, we will be requesting each stakeholder explain the why behind your perspective and add your context behind why you may or may not share the speaker's views.
We have a limited amount of time today based on the amount of interest we received. Therefore, we will have a timekeeper that will cut the speakers off at 5 minutes and will hold us to our agenda timeline. This will ensure that we will provide enough time for each speaker out of respect to hear each perspective and to allow for that robust stakeholder discussion. During the peer-to-peer discussion, the raise hand feature will be used to open up the phone lines, or we will also take questions or comments using the chat feature.
Great, thank you. And again, thanks for joining us today. So our first, and I say moderate, Silas, can we move to the next slide, please? Perfect. This is our agenda for the day. We're going to go through 3 categories. The topics that we already teed up that we anticipate to be up for joint authority voting on February 1st. I'd like to start with the governance topic. I'd like to invite the following speakers volunteered, and we thank you very much for volunteered to share their perspectives. Matthew Loftus from Pacificor, Mary Winke from Public Generating Pool, Scott Renzel from Pacific Gas and Electric, and Vijay Satal from Western Resources Advocates. Now, first, I'd like to turn to Matthew. Matthew, would you turn on your video, and can we advance, I think, 2 slides to Matthew's slide? go one more. Yes, I'd like to invite Matthew to provide your perspective.
Hey, are you all able to hear that? Just want to make sure that I'm coming across.
You sound great.
Great. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Again, Matthew Loftus on behalf of Pacific Corps. I do have a few slides. I don't think I'm going to even take the 5 minutes because generally these slides are intended to support the work that the Governance Review Committee undertook through that lengthy stakeholder process and developing the draft final proposal. I don't know, Lindsay, I don't know if you are moving the slides or not, but if we could just go to the second slide. That one right there, yeah. Again, Pacific Corps supports the recommendations of the GRC with respect to governance, in particular the expansion of the joint authority construct, the expansion of the advisory role. We also appreciate the increase in stakeholder involvement that's been recommended, as well as the RIF going forward. The next slide. Again, we feel like the final draft proposal is a unique and creative way to work within the California statutory limitations, and also reflects a lengthy stakeholder process that involves broad interests of all of the currently participating entities in the WEIM. We also appreciate that the GRC acknowledged that for future developments within the market, and in particular, if we were talking about an RTO, that you know,
Matt, we might have lost you. Do you still have audio?
yeah, are you guys able to hear me?
I can hear you now.
Sorry about that. On the last slide, again, just continued support for the GRC's efforts. We support the recommendation that the EDAM be reviewed jointly both by the Board of Directors as well as the governing body. And we appreciate the board's flexibility to allow that joint consideration to take place. We also support the recommendation that the new governance approach be effective once the FERC has conclusively accepted the EDAM market design through the Section 205 filing. And with that, I believe that covers all of my slides. And again, I'm happy to weigh in to try to answer any questions. Thank you.
Kathleen, you need to unmute.
Of course, sorry. I was going to say thank you, Matthew. We're going to go on to Mary Winkie next. Mary, please take it away.
Thanks, Kathleen. As Kathleen mentioned, I'm Mary Winkie, Executive Director of the Public Generating Pool, and we can just go right into the next slide here and skip to the next one. Okay. So we reiterate some of the things that Matt just talked about. You know, I also would just be absolutely remiss if I also didn't recognize the efforts of the Governance Review Committee. As a person who actually participated on that committee for some time, I recognize and understand the commitment that was made and the time and work that goes into it in terms of actual time commitment, but also just kind of negotiating with your peers and that process. And I really think that model is a good one in terms of threading the needle on some of these really challenging issues and trying to balance diverging perspectives. So I would be really remiss if I didn't recognize the hard work and commitment by all of the individuals who participated in that committee. And I'm kind of going to take my first two bullets a little together, and I think what Therese taught me, and, many of you know Therese, and her lasting legacy is through this governance review committee. And one of the things that she always did was try to bring things back up to kind of what are the principles, what are we really trying to achieve? And I think the lens through which we look at governance is that good governance should really drive unbiased decision-making and balanced outcomes that we all can trust. A structure that we all can trust is going to get to those good decisions and those balanced outcomes. And, there's a real challenge in California in the sense that the CAISO board isn't going to be unaffiliated with California absent legislative change. So it's a real challenge to thread that needle of achieving those principles when you're limited in that way. And so we really think that the GRC's proposal for joint authority is a good move in the right direction to get toward a framework that achieves those balanced outcomes in light of the legal limitation there. The joint authority model requires the Board of Governors and the governing body to talk to each other face to face. Eventually, hopefully, they will meet in person and have face-to-face meetings. And I think that's a good model to really get to those unbiased decision making and balanced outcomes, kind of given those limitations and given the fact that the CAISO board, at the end of the day, retains backstop authority. And so having those individuals all in the room making decisions together, I think makes a lot of sense. For EJAM, the GRC developed this test looking at whether or not a rule, I'm probably going to get the exact language wrong, but directly impacts or directly impacts the formation of a locational marginal price. I do think we have some concern that is a pretty narrowly tailored test and may not be durable into the future as we deal with additional complexities, additional issues, a more fully integrated market where it will become increasingly difficult to sort of narrowly parse what should be joint authority versus what should be just the Board of Governors. And this test feels pretty narrow. PGP has advocated in the past for a broader sort of general rule that encompasses all of the real-time and day-ahead market rules, and then an exception process versus kind of this very narrowly tailored rule, narrowly tailored type test. But I think, at the end of the day, supportive of moving forward with this, even if it may not be entirely perfect, to really kind of, go through kind of a time will tell process and see how it works and see how that test applies to future initiatives, and that there should be some openness to continuing to raise some of the things like parity concepts that PGP raised in its as part of the process that may need and warrant further discussion as we move forward. And then also related to this, that the change in bylaws is positive. That really recognizes the decision maker's obligation to be balanced and not take the interests of, California load over other market participants. I think that's really important. But I also think part of what we really need in order to trust that is to see how this process works. And we do think that there is further trust work to be done in terms of, do people, not only is the structure designed to drive unbiased decision-making, but is that what is actually happening? Do people and stakeholders trust that that's what is happening? And I think that's kind of a time will tell type situation, that we need to kind of see how it works in action. And even though we've been talking about joint authority for quite some time, it actually has been in practice for not that much time yet. So I think there'll be a lot of interest in some of the upcoming decisions. So am I within, did I do it within 5 minutes, Kathleen? Am I going over? I'm getting nervous.
You're exactly 5 minutes. You have you're almost over. So do you have any last thoughts, Mary, before you close out?
Just one more thing. Just want to say very supportive of change, proposals around the Regional Issues Forum and stakeholder engagement. I think really moving in the right direction in that regard. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you so much. Perfectly on time. So with that, I will invite Scott Renzel from PG&E, please.
Video, mute and video here. I wanted to say thank you to the Regional Issues Forum for the opportunity to speak today. Obviously, the issue of governance, both inside and outside of California, is a very important issue. It has many opportunities, and some would cast them as challenges. But I think if we move to the first slide, this, in a nutshell, captures what I think is a real opportunity for us here. And I recognize that California statute limitations guide some of the action that can be taken, but the move towards joint authority with the EIM and now extending that to the extended day-ahead market as proposed, including the locational marginal price component, I think is a healthy adaptation as we launch out into the extended day-ahead market. I think with many market designs, it is not clear what the full end result will be. And while we've made a lot of groundwork there, I think it's important to understand that, as Mary had alluded to, trust is going to be a key component to this, and communication. And I think the joint authority allows for that to exist, allows for voices to be heard, allows for voices like the Regional Issues Forum and stakeholders to be heard in the process, to have weight in the process, and continue to develop the trust that's been established with the EIM and continues to grow as time goes on. Let me jump to the next page, and I'm going to get into a couple of specifics. I don't want to reiterate or belabor a lot of the points that folks have been made, but the idea of the continuation and expansion of joint authority to the extended day-ahead market, looking to include locational marginal prices, as well as I think the Governance Review Committee has done a lot of work to resolve. As much as we may hope that there are no issues or contention, it may arise, and there's a plan and a path for that to be addressed. I also recognize what it does is really start to lay a groundwork for building that trust, because if we are to expand and continue the expansion into a regional organization, there will obviously need to be more substantial governance. This starts to set up a framework and a way to allow for entities to grow into that step by step. And as with market design, I think the governance is going to change. We support the idea of the timing associated with when it will be rolled out. And obviously, there's been a lot of stakeholder engagement on what the structure of that governance setup is to date. Like many of the previous speakers, I applaud not only the Governance Review Committee, but the many participants that have voiced their opinion and provided comments and feedback to this process. I think it's led to a robust answer that is a good basis and foundation for us to start from. And I look forward to the opportunity as we march forward together and expanding this marketplace and governing it together. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Scott. We really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Now, can I invite Vijay Satal? Would you please join us?
Hello, thank you. Hello, everybody, and thanks, Kathleen and Lindsay, for offering to host this special meeting. WRI is a 6-state intermountain large nonprofit organization that promotes clean energy development, but also looking at decarbonization with a very important fact in mind, 8760. That's the reliability of the grid. We never want to compromise that. We also want a market to grow well. So in listening to Mary and Scott and others, I would like to build on that, on governance, by sharing. Can we move to the next slide, please? Oh, am I changing the slides? My bad. My bad. Here we go. Thank you. So I don't want to repeat what everybody's already said, but I will try to touch upon what is important from the public interest sector in terms of the growth of the EDAM market in 2 years. is the very thoughtful implementation of the concept of joint authority to the EDAM framework, the applied to concept being tested and being proposed, the equitability mindset with an eye for authority to be shared, transparency that's been pretty clear. And as at the governing body, at the GRC meeting that I echoed and endorsed, the GRC proposal on behalf of WRA and our governance team was the very thoughtful, explicit engagement of two governing bodies that would offer a good dialogue between the original Board of Governors of the Cal ISO footprint with the larger growing market that recognizes grid regionalization. The more important thing that WRA would like to recognize is the thoughtful effort put into the application process and what would be required, and also making sure that unique situations may require explicit thought. I'd like to move to the next item here, which is equally important. And my bad, my hands are a little, I'm playing games here. I think the more important thing we would like to also highlight is the advisory input process that would support the governing body in their decision making, and the recognition that we may need expert opinion or independent perspective. The fact that the EIM governing body has brought in a market assessment expert is a recognition of the fact that we want to look at market impacts in and across the system. Another important aspect that we recognize and we value is the governing body's positions would be weighed in ways that gives thoughtful recommendations, but engaging with the RIF as well, that this meeting is all about, and the liaisons would like that interaction. I close by highlighting two areas. I know I'm very much within my 5 minutes, but I'd like to really highlight this area that I'm going to give more time to, is the continued support for building out the stakeholder framework. I'm going to go blunt and frank in requesting our California contingency of consumer advocates, clean energy advocates, developers, and others to recognize that there is a clear need for regionalization that would benefit all parties. So the role of the RIF, where it can help with facilitating a roundtable, which is great. We need to work through that. I think my RIF liaison colleagues all know that very well, and we will work through that over this year. But we also support what Cal ISO staff has done last year, is a working group approach in enhancing stakeholder conversations, working through iterations of drafts, taking feedback, bringing it back, is basically a true exercise in bringing the bench strength of entities and stakeholders to the table, and really applying the complex and substantial standard test. Last but not the least is a very thoughtful proposal that once FERC has conclusively accepted the Cal ISO proposal, and if it's approved, is to ensure that you can make the program effective. I think this gives certainty and predictability to all parties concerned. One area that I really want to just highlight in closing is this is not the end deal. So we know things have to work out, and WRA and the public interest community at large encourages the governing body to highlight areas that they want help this coming year, so we can work to improve. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vijay. I really appreciate that. And thank you to all of our speakers, Matthew, Mary, Scott, and Vijay. At this point, we're going to transition over to the peer-to-peer discussion. We have about 8 to 10 minutes left of our time. So before I will ask anyone who is on the line or WebEx, please raise your hand so we can start to try to get you in the queue. As folks are raising their hand, if they'd like to share any of their thoughts or perspectives, I'd ask Lauren or Meg, are there any chats that we've gotten while speakers have been speaking?
There's no comments in chat right now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lauren. Silas, do we have anyone raising their hand?
No one raising their hand yet, but as a reminder to attendees, that raise hand icon is located just above your chat panel, and it looks like a little hand.
I'm going to delay for a minute. If anyone would like to share any of your thoughts on the governance topic, please do raise your hand. Or if you're on the phone, which I think you just said, can you repeat that? Just make sure if anyone missed it. how to?
Absolutely. If you would like to raise your hand to enter the queue, the raise hand icon is located at the bottom right of your screen, just above your chat panel. It looks like a little hand icon.
Thank you, Cyrus, for helping me delay. I'm not seeing anyone jumping in the queue right now, and unless I'm missing that, I will just say thank you very much to the speakers again who volunteered and for sharing your perspectives. Thank you to the Governance Review Committee. I'll echo that. I think that is one theme that really stuck out. And I will say that I completely agree that the process by which the GRC has managed their stakeholdering of potential governance changes has been a really great job, very inclusive, and we appreciate that. Some other things that jumped out at me, and I'll just, so that because we have 5 minutes left of our time, I'll try and keep it. And I'll ask a quick question for those who volunteered. Another theme that jumped out at me while all 4 of you were speaking is an idea of this is a great first step for EDAM go live. I heard a sense that of you wanting us to walk away with, let's start with this framework for an EDAM, but let's keep our eyes on what next steps might be. With that, I'd like to ask the speakers who volunteered, when you are thinking about where you'd like to see this going, so let's be forward perspective, where you'd like to see us go next with governance, do you have any targeted suggestions kind of to prioritize a next step? And I'll open it up to any, Matthew, Mary, Scott, or Vijay. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm happy to offer a thought, Kathleen. This is Mary. So I think my thought, well, first of all, as I mentioned, I think that, and again, setting aside sort of legislative change that would allow the CAISO Board of Governors to be fully independent. I'm just kind of putting that in the parking lot for now, assuming we have the same legal limitations on what the CAISO Board is able to do in terms of independence. I think that there is, as we sort of move into a day-ahead framework, there's just more and more integration. And you know, the CAISO is both the market operator and has reliability responsibilities. And no other entity participating in the market has both of those roles. And so I think as you become more integrated, as you move into the day-ahead timeframe, it becomes harder and harder to sort of parse out, well, what is CAISO doing in its role of maintaining reliability for California versus what is it doing as the market operator? And so I think we'll be in a position of just needing to think through, you know, can there be enough trust in the joint authority model to really put sort of a lot of things into that bucket so that we're really kind of covering everything that the EM governing body is appropriately covering. But I think that we will have to gain experience in order to move into that conversation, right? Like I think that we've gotten to a good place in terms of the scope of joint authority. We probably got to a good place that everybody is sort of slightly unhappy. That's probably a good thing. And we move into the day-ahead market, we see how things go, and then I think then at that point we might have more information about how to move forward and really answer your question. So that's what I think is going to happen, but I don't have any other sort of concrete sense of where we should go in the future, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. Hey, Vijay, I saw your hand raised and you lowered it, but did you have something you wanted to share?
Yes, thank you. And it's good to hear Mary's thoughts. I'm going to take this question a little different way on what would be like future things that could be done. In our slides, on the last slide, we talked about the working group approach. I'm using Mary's thoughts in a different way to say the same thing as learning by doing. I really hope CalISO staff explicitly understand the huge challenge they have in front of them, and we all want to work with them like you all are doing, and market participants, that the working group approach still continue to be used and not dropped off. It's not a one-off thing just to push the EDAM up the ledge and get it working. So the working group approach should be used and continue to be used in a more deliberative way to take examples, take scenarios and test things out and come back. I think that's the way we will really learn to make a market work well, because I think we all have one common goal, is a market that works well in the West that will not have the challenges that we could have avoided. There will be always unknown pitfalls, but let's try to avoid the known pitfalls.
Great, thank you, Vijay. Matthew or Scott, do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share before we close out this topic?
No, I would echo a little bit of what Mary and Vijay have expressed, and I think for me, part of the building of that trust and the opportunity for the stakeholders to communicate comes through transparency. And the CAISO has a responsibility in ensuring that the transparency, not only of their market design decisions, but also their governance decisions. How are we going to identify, we're going to get to a topic that is up for debate. Should it be joint authority? Should it be advisory? Being transparent, absorbing stakeholder feedback and information about their understanding of the complexity of the issue and where that governance should lie cannot be ignored. Otherwise, it will degrade the trust that we're trying to build in the first place. So I think it's important to recognize not only is that market design an important stakeholder aspect, but as we assume this joint authority, we're going to have to discuss and debate where that governance should lie for certain issues. We need to have the healthy, robust dialogue about it. I believe it encourages transparency. It encourages trust. It will foster the community that's necessary to start tackling the bigger issues that Mary was alluding to, which is if we are going to form a regional organization in the future, that is going to require California legislative change. That's not going to come without support. So how do we head in that direction in order to foster that? And that comes from building that community.
Great, thank you. Great points. Matthew, any last thoughts before we close that?
No, nothing really. Just I think Scott, Vijay, and Mary articulated my thoughts as well, which is, flexibility potentially going forward once the EDAM is actually up and operational, flexibility in determining what particular issues may fall under the joint authority, and in which leads then to that trust that's been discussed.
Great, thank you. Thank you all very much. The RIF really appreciates you volunteering. And let me pass the ball back to my colleague, Lindsay.
Thank you. Okay, so we can advance the slide to the next discussion topic, which is the day-ahead market enhancements. We have enough speakers on this topic that we actually split it up into two sections so that we wouldn't lose the content of what each speaker was talking about. So we'll have two separate discussion sections for that peer-to-peer discussion and where you can ask clarifying questions. So we'll go ahead and start off with the first speaker. Could we advance to the next slide, please? Thank you. Michael Wilding from Pacificor.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Lindsay. Mike Wilding, Vice President, Energy Supply Management at Pacificor. And apologize, don't have slides, but just wanted to say a couple words regarding the DAME proposal, and I'll be super quick. But first, we appreciate CAISO and all the work that staff has done developing the proposal and the opportunity to speak here at the RIF. We do think that the products that are part of the DAME, especially the imbalanced reserve product, that is very important to address the uncertainty between the day ahead and the real-time timeframes, especially as we add more renewables and variable energy resources to the system. That these types of products will be very important. And so with that, we really appreciate the CAISO making some changes in the final proposal to use a demand curve for that. That's something we're supportive of, and then also we support and agree that this should fall under joint authority. So with that's all I got today, Lindsay, and really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Could we go ahead and advance to the next slide, please? Thank you. Arnie Quinn from Vistra, and we can go ahead and move it to his starting slide. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Lindsay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. If you could move to the next slide, that'd be great. So first, start off by saying, really appreciate the opportunity to share our perspectives today. At the highest level, we support intellectually the need for a zonal upward uncertainty product in the day-ahead market. We understand the need, and we understand why CAISO's proposed it. And we also very much support the idea of moving out-of-market actions that are currently largely embedded in the load bias into the day-ahead market in some way. So, in our view, all of the things that we have concerns about, we would take the time to fix. And that's especially because we think some of the connections between the day-ahead market enhancements and EDAM are a little attenuated. So we feel like you could take the time to fix this proposal and then roll it out. Once it's in a better spot. We don't support the RUC changes, especially in kind of the form that they're proposed at to date, and we are especially concerned that they could lead to some unintended adverse contractual consequences for the California RA resources. I don't want to speak for the RAP resources, but wonder, I guess, whether there will be similar contractual issues for RAP resources. For the imbalanced reserve product, it's not clear to us that a downward imbalanced product is necessary, because we think the day-ahead schedules probably provide downward flexibility in real time. Probably our largest concern overall with the proposal is the nodal design. And we believe that the nodal design introduces some significant complexities and inefficiencies, and that those concerns are not offset by commensurate benefits. Could you go to the next slide, please? So, our concerns with RUC are probably metaphysical and practical. It's not clear to us why the ancillary service is included in the initial EDAM design when all the other ancillary services are proposed to be managed by EDAM BAAs individually. On the reliability capacity product, for us, probably the biggest issue is, or two issues really are, that we don't believe, at least from our perspective, that California RA resources can offer those products at anything other than a zero price. Again, not sure how that's going to work out for RAP resources, but question that as well. And for us, as a practical matter, if we are providing and being paid for the reliability capacity product through the RUC process, we believe we'll likely have to pay any revenues back to our RA buyers as a result of our RA contracts. That's just going to lead to an administrative burden, and we don't see a corresponding benefit to just those mechanics, and we don't think those are insignificant either. Can you move to the next slide, please? In terms of the nodal design, we have real concerns that it will lead to potentially distorted day-ahead prices because congestion patterns will be based on deployment scenarios that might not materialize in real time. And in our view, what you could do instead is maybe establish more granular zones to address any potential reliability or deliverability concerns. We haven't really seen great support that the deliverability concerns are real, but if there are, we would create granular zones. We would monitor those granular zones, and we'd kind of take an incremental process to determine whether deliverability, to the extent it can be shown, exists once you move to a zonal construct. I'll say the other concern we have with a nodal construct is once you move to nodal, you start to become concerned about whether a resource gets market power as a result of being behind a transmission constraint. And that then drives the need, at least we believe the perceived need for tighter market power mitigation. In our mind, this is like any other ancillary service product. We think the market power mitigation that's employed for other reserve services would be perfectly adequate. And we think that using a zonal design would also relieve any lingering concerns about market power. With that, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnie. Okay, we'll move to the next slide, please. Okay, and we have Sergio Duenas from California Energy Storage Alliance. Sergio, take it over.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Sergio Duenas with the Storage Alliance, CISA, the policy manager for CISA. We are a broad advocacy group representing over 100 companies in the energy storage environment, from developers, technology providers, system integrators, etc.
Sergio, it's hard to hear you. If you could speak up just a little bit, that would be helpful.
Yeah, one moment.
Thank you.
Is this a little bit better? Yeah?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, well, we have been very actively engaged with CAISO staff in the development of the DAME initiative. And overall, I think similar to what the prior two speakers underscored, we're very supportive of the creation of new products that will bolster reliability in an efficient fashion. However, we are concerned with the lack of discussion of some points in the final proposal. So I want to underscore three areas of opportunity that we see in this final proposal. The first one, I think more generally, as a point of feedback for the ISO generally, we are a bit concerned with the fact that several elements of the DAME final proposal have changed very drastically in the last couple of iterations of the final and draft final proposal. These changes, even though some of them are being responsive to stakeholder feedback, these changes, and more importantly, their fashion and the fact that the changes don't fully acknowledge why or what are the reasons behind these modifications, this doesn't provide clarity or certainty to stakeholders. So trying to be a bit more timely of that would be very useful, I think, for all parties involved. The second point has to do with the last topic that Vistra was just covering. It has to do with the fact that some of the design decisions on the DAME initiative result in the need for elements that will hinder the efficiency of the imbalance reserve products, like local market power mitigation. There have been different parts or versions of this proposal that have included either price caps or bid caps and then market power mitigation. And we think that all of this maybe could be traced back to that insistence on implementing a nodal approach, as I was hinting at. The final point that we are concerned about is the final proposal's admission that it does not address any of the material limitations of the formula that model real-time state of charge for storage resources. So basically, the DAME final proposal acknowledges that that initiative does not include any means to keep track or count the impacts of imbalance reserves in real-time state of charge. This could potentially hinder the ability of resources to meet other awards like day-ahead energy awards. And of course, this could hinder reliability and will definitely introduce added risks and complexities for storage resources, their owners, and their scheduling coordinators. This is something that it's very uncommon to find in a CAISO proposal, particularly a final proposal, an admission of a deficiency without a proposal to cure said deficiency. So we really urge CAISO staff to try to consider how to close this loop in a way. It could be done through similar to how it's been done in the Energy Storage Enhancements Initiative by improving the formula, but we're open to working with stakeholders on this matter. That really is all for me, and thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Okay, yep, thank you. It is time for our peer-to-peer discussion section. So if you have a question or you would like to state your company's perspective, if there are differences or similarities or you support what you've heard today, please use the raise hand feature, or you could also write the question out in the chat. And then let's see, Meg or Lauren, have you seen any chat questions come through?
Lindsay, no questions in the chat so far.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I have a quick question for Arnie. In your presentation, you had stated that, I think it was slide 27, some concerns about the RUC proposal. I was wondering if your concerns for the RUC proposal were from the proposal to, I guess, change RUC and allow down awards, or if it's more on a must-offer obligation of resources that are required to bid that product.
Yeah, thank you. So no, that's a great question, and I think generally we question kind of the overall need for the down products. So I think that applies both to the down version of the imbalance reserve and also the reliability capacity down. So that is one of our concerns. The other element of it, I think is twofold, and it is this is again very much perspective of as a California RA seller of California RA. So as a result of that, we have already have an obligation to offer into RUC, and to some extent, adding another product and having that product be applied across the EDAM footprint, to some extent, changes a little bit the nature of the obligation that we took on when we took on an RA obligation for California load. That's when I said there's a little bit of a metaphysical issue for us. That's I think maybe the metaphysical element of it. The practical part of it is because it's in the RUC product, or because it's in RUC, our view is we will likely be required under our RA contracts to pay back any revenues we earn. So even if we bid zero, and there's a reliability capacity clearing price above zero, we're just going to have to go through the mechanics of paying that money back to the RA buyers. As we were talking about internally yesterday, I'm not sure there's a lot more to it than that for us. Like I don't know that getting a reliability capacity award in RUC disadvantages us in terms of what we're allowed to do or what we're able to do in real time. We have a must offer in real time already as a RA resource. So to some extent, we just don't have a lot of upside. Don't see a lot of upside to the reliability capacity product being in RUC, and we have the downside of just going through the settlement and returning the money to the buyer. And that sounds kind of ministerial and administrative, but the kind of the costs associated with that, feel very real to us.
That's helpful. Thank you for that response. I think that helps clarify your points quite a bit. So thank you. Are there any questions that have any hands raised?
There's still no
hands raised. Sorry, there are no hands raised at this time, but as a reminder to attendees, you can enter the queue by pressing the raise hand icon just above the chat panel.
And this is Kathleen. I'd also just note that if you are a speaker in the second section, feel free to jump in as well. Like this, we want this to be a collaborative peer-to-peer discussion, so don't feel restricted. So if there's any, if you're on the participant list and you'd like to jump in, please just feel free to open your line and ask a question or share your thoughts. Great point. Okay, well, I have another question for Sergio, if he's available again. You had mentioned for the imbalance reserve product, you were concerned about the nodal aspects of that product. And I believe you had stated that it would potentially impact the state of charge for storage resources. Could you go into a little bit more detail in your concern about the nodal procurement for imbalance reserves?
Yeah, those are two separate topics, actually. The fact that it's nodal, the fact that imbalance reserve would be nodally procured is much more related to why the CAISO staff might want to pursue something like local market power mitigation. The issue about state of charge is distinct. That's a different issue, and basically the DAME final proposal acknowledges that today the formula that model real-time state of charge for storage would not include the impacts of imbalance reserves. Because of that, it could be we could reach a situation where CAISO operations believes that an asset can comply with a day-ahead award for energy, for example, because of the modeled state of charge. But in reality, that state of charge has changed because of imbalance reserves, which have not been modeled. And in the final proposal, CAISO staff acknowledges that that is a concern, that can create reliability issues, but it doesn't offer any way to cure that concern. We believe that that could be addressed by, as well, incorporating that into the formula. However, it is difficult to know at this time how much of the imbalance reserve award would materialize as energy in real time, right? So essentially, the final proposal acknowledges that there's a gap. It acknowledges that neither this initiative nor Energy Storage Enhancements Initiative has any way of mitigating that gap, but it doesn't propose any solution to it.
Okay, thank you so much for bringing that perspective to this discussion.
Thank you.
I guess I'll ask one more time if anybody would like to raise your hand. I don't know. I guess I could look to see if there's any hands raised. Does not look like that. Are there any last perspectives that any of the speakers would like to give or provide before we move on to the next section? Okay, well, I guess I can move it on over to Kathleen again. Great, thank you. Double mute there for a second. Thank you also, and thank you, Lindsay. So, we were just, let's move on to the next set of speakers, and then we can borrow a little bit of the agenda time for the discussion at the end, and we'll try and tease out some more discussion there. So I'm going to invite my next three speakers are Scott Renzel from Pacific Gas and Electric, Carrie Bentley will follow from Western Power Trading Forum, and then Mary Wienke at the end for Public Generating Pool. So can I invite Scott to join us again and share your perspectives on DAME?
Thank you, Kathleen. Scott Renzel with Pacific Gas and Electric Company. I'm wearing multiple hats today, but in regard to the day-ahead market enhancements initiative. I'll echo some similar comments that the previous speakers talked about. The, sorry, it's not working. Is that better? Yeah, there we go. Apologize.
Great, that's better. Thank you, Scott.
Sorry about that. Um, the challenge that exists in moving from the day ahead timeframe to the real time timeframe, I think the previous speakers had pointed to, and we acknowledge and recognize that there is a challenge there. And the day ahead market enhancements initiative has spent a considerable amount of time trying to address what is happening in that space and how to appropriately address it. The introduction of a new market product, I think, is looked upon generally as a positive, but I think as the earlier speakers had brought out, the introduction of those products does create some concerns and things that need to be considered in more detail. And the amount of time or movement that's happened in the day ahead market enhancements proposal, while I think warranted because it is an absorption of stakeholder feedback, has been quick. And I think that has been challenging for not only myself, but many in the stakeholder community. One, to keep track of, but two, to recognize, digest, and then fully understand the impact of material changes taking place over the course of time. I don't believe that's a fault. It's just an apparent reality in what is happening, and we are moving quickly to try to put something in place to address a concern. I think that's the right attitude. How we get more support and clarity and transparency about what those changes are, I think would be a reasonable expectation from the community, and I would support it. As far as the products go, again, I think moving a capacity product into the day ahead market has a benefit to the overall market. It can be seen. It clearly has, at least in California, some challenges around the resource adequacy program that exists, how that functions, what it's designed to do, and how these products, even if different products, would end up creating some overlap or some consistency that's going to have to be worked out inside the stakeholder community. I think the CAISO has done a good job of incorporating some controls so that the product is effective in addressing each individual BAA's needs as well as being able to work in the system. My understanding and connection to the extended day ahead market, as Mike had alluded to, around helping with that uncertainty, I think is an important aspect of what the day ahead market will do. The ability to set the market up in advance for success is often looked at as a positive, and it has, we've seen evidence of that in the EIM space, even though it's a much shorter time frame. The ability to advance that forward, I think, will likely generate a benefit to the overall reliability of the system, and I think many would support that concept. The mechanics of how it's done still have some challenges that I think many of the previous speakers had talked about. The settlement process is going to create some challenges for folks in the audience. I know that the CAISO has moved around on its ability to either absorb a settlement process with the ISO, or in the most recent proposal where it has committed to providing information to the stakeholder community to contractually resolve those issues. It's the complexity that Arnie spoke of, I think, is apparent in the market. I do believe it's resolvable. I think it will come down to introducing this product and understanding the mechanics will allow people to work through it in very quick fashion contractually, and it will become a standard, way in which to deal with it in very short order. I think the hesitancy at this point in time is that there's some unknowns to that. So there's a fear around what that will ultimately look like. And I believe it's founded in reasonable fear, but I believe it's actually going to get resolved in very, very short order. I think the importance around the day ahead markets enhancements also is this interconnection with some other initiatives at the ISO. And I think that, Sergio had talked about its overlap and connection with the storage resources, obviously a clear connection to the extended day ahead market. especially with the introduction of a new product, it's very important to ensure not only that we have a good, decent understanding of the product and all of the intricacies related to the product, but the impact it will have on other initiatives and other parts of the market that currently exists. I believe it was Arnie that had talked about congestion and the impact that this product would have on the congestion market. The amount of information that's available, I know the concern has been raised in multiple areas. I believe that the concern is valid. It's hard to understand the full magnitude of the concern and all of the implications without additional analysis, which I believe actually can be done inside the implementation phase. And I would encourage the ISO to push forward on trying to quantify and better analyze the overall impact that it will have on congestion and how that would work. And if, policy changes need to arise as a result of analysis that proves something wrong, I would support some of the language that other speakers have talked about, which is if we find real holes, we need to be able to stop, digest, understand, and revisit the policy. I'm not sure that they're there. I'm not saying that they're there, but I still think we have the implementation for the day-ahead markets enhancements I would expect is going to take an extended period of time. It's not a 2-month implementation. There will need to be a robust set of testing inside the platform, not only to understand how the product is functioning, but the impact it will have on the market. So the market scenario testing will be critical to the success of the product. One, to ensure it's meeting its policy objectives and working effectively, but also to ensure that there are no surprises inside of that process. And I think it'll be a valuable testing bed to prove out the capability of the product. Let me stop there and I'll give an opportunity for the other speakers to talk and answer any questions that people have.
Great, thank you, Scott, and thanks so much. That was a lot of really good information. I appreciate it. And we made some food for thought, so when we get to the discussion, I think I have some questions. Next, I would like to invite Carrie Bentley to go over what you'd like to share with us.
Thanks, Kathleen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. This is Carrie Bentley from the Western Power Trading Forum. I'm going to start broad and then go deep. So first of all, the day-ahead market clears about 80% of the CAISO load. But practically speaking, what that means is that if it's $1 billion a month market, 800 million of it is cleared through the day-ahead market. The day-ahead market price is what is the main value proposition for EDAM. It's the main value proposition for ratepayers in California to be a part of the ISO. The day-ahead price also signals to many resources where they should locate, in particular to storage, because that's where most of them clear. So for the Western Power Trading Forum, which is a nonprofit trade forum dedicated to market competition and transparency under the premise that well-functioning markets lead to lower ratepayer cost, this initiative has been the priority for us for the last 5 years. We really dug into the weeds, and our primary question has been, although we agree with the goal, does the design details lead to a well-functioning day-ahead market? And I'll tell you that our conclusion has been no on this for reasons that several of the previous presenters have brought up. So the first thing that they talked about was the nodal procurement aspect of this. And so what that means is that imbalanced product is being procured nodally right along with energy. That is a novel design. No other ISO has a reserve product that's procured nodally, and there are some pretty good reasons for that. One, reserve products, and in particular this one, is an uncertainty product. And what that means at a nodal level is that you are trying to predict in the day-ahead time frame where uncertainty will materialize by node in real time. If you could predict that uncertainty, you'd probably have a lot of virtual hedges on and make a ton of money right now. It's incredibly hard to predict uncertainty. And the way the CAISO is doing it from a practical and formulaic perspective is very simplistic. So simplistic that it's doomed to be inaccurate. I'll give you a very quick example. Solar, they're predicting uncertainty for solar. And then they're just distributing it based on something very technical, but essentially size, the amount of output they're predicting from solar. That means all else being equal, solar in Bakersfield has the same amount of uncertainty attributed to it as solar on the coast. That's a ridiculous assumption. Solar on the coast has much more uncertainty than solar in Bakersfield. Uncertainty, to really forecast uncertainty, you need to dig into the statistics and really delve into why that uncertainty is materializing. That's step one. Step two is, why are operators biasing for the uncertainty? What part of the uncertainty is causing the out-of-market commitments? These are really important questions when you're talking about developing a reserve product that we haven't gone far enough in the initiative to answer. Some stakeholders, Vistra, for example, Kathleen, have delved into what other ISOs have done. The MSC has talked about this a bit, but we haven't, as a stakeholder community, really made those connections between load bias and uncertainty and how to do that forecasting. And the way the CAISO is doing it in that simplistic manner has two main effects. One, it's predicting uncertainty that we know is going to be wrong, and that has an impact on prices. So one, we know that price, that what you're assuming in the day ahead needs to account for 100% of uncertainty, but we know that won't be realized. Well, now we know that price is sending out a very incorrect signal. We may or may not need storage to locate there, given that price signal, because that price signal may be saying, hey, this is a really good place to locate. Look at all this uncertainty. But in reality, in the real time, we may not need that resource there at all. So that's a very inaccurate price signal. Two, what may happen is that we're sending this price signal in the day ahead, but it could be completely wrong, and we're going to prioritize that over our actual ancillary service products. Because AS is actually zonal. We're not testing for nodal for our NERC and WEC required AS products. So what's going to happen is, all else being equal, there's one resource behind a constraint and one resource not, that AS behind the constraint is going to get the AS award. And we actually need that AS for reliability. So the way we're doing this nodal procurement is both, I think, sending incorrect price signals out and impacting reliability. So when you hear people say they have an issue with the nodal, this isn't conceptual, nodal camp versus zonal camp. There are some serious technical issues with nodal. We think that this can be overcome, but we think stakeholders in general should have, a more global discussion about it. We have had some serious issues with the stakeholder process. Our proposal to the CAISO, our proposal to really anyone who will listen to us, is to extend this initiative. And we feel there are only two real options. One is to simplify this significantly, do some actual statistics and implement it at the same time as EDAM, or delay it altogether, get EDAM in first, gain experience with the market, gain experience with how EDAM areas will treat and deal with uncertainty, and then implement it later. And we really feel, and I know, Kathleen, I'm running out of time, we really feel that this is just not ready for go live, given how massively important the day ahead price is in terms of needing it for EDAM and needing it for simply to have a benefit of the ISO. Thanks, Kathleen.
Great, thank you, Carrie. I appreciate it. And we're giving a little, and Josh Walters is our timekeeper, and he's using his judgment to keep everyone honest on time. So thank you to Josh too. I appreciate that. With that, let me invite Mary Minke, please, to close us out before we open up to the peer-to-peer discussion again.
Thanks, Kathleen. So I'm going to echo what some of the other speakers have already said about DAME, and probably bring it up a level a bit from kind of where Carrie was. So I think, echoing a little bit of what the initial speakers were talking about, we do think that, day ahead imbalance management is critical and going to be increasingly so as greater amounts of variable generation are integrated into the market. And so, overall, definitely see a need for the imbalance reserve product, and supportive of all of the work that many, as the other stakeholders have alluded to, a long time of working on this. And that sort of status quo is not a solution. Load conformance action shouldn't be a solution. We're supportive of, tools that favor market products that support reliability versus relying on, continued market operator intervention. And so I think generally supportive of kind of the concepts and the need for this but also noting, as other speakers have noted, that there's still some unresolved issues and questions, I think, in terms of sort of how it will work, what the mechanics will be, what the interaction is with other initiatives, including the tie to EDM, price formation, market power mitigation, thinking through sort of all of the intersected pieces here. There's still quite a few questions that remain. I think we're supportive of it moving forward with sort of recognition that seems to be sort of what's happening. It's been going on for a long time, and it's moving toward a final approach. So let's make sure that as it's implemented, it's done so conservatively in a way that I think, as Scott was talking about, we can kind of learn and test concepts and gain understanding as we go, and understand those potential benefits and operational challenges, and kind of be able to fix and kind of learn as we go versus a continuation of the existing stakeholder process. So I will stop there, and happy to be a part of the peer-to-peer discussion. Thanks, Kathleen.
Great, thank you. So let's move on. Thank you, Mary. Let's move on to the peer-to-peer discussion. Let me tee this up as I'm going to ask a few questions to get started. While I'll ask if anyone in the audience has any questions that you want to put in the chat, please do. If you would like to join in, you can share your thoughts. I don't need to be quick. So if you have your own perspective you'd like to share, please raise your hand. Or if you're on the phone, join the audio that way. And I'd encourage you to feel comfortable just to have an informal conversation. And so again, I would just encourage you, while I ask a couple moderator questions, if you'd like to raise your hand and join in the discussion. The other thing I'll ask is that I will actually tee up all of the speakers. So Mike, Arnie, Sergio, Scott, Carrie, and Mary, all 6 of you, feel free to answer any of these questions that I throw out. And if there's anyone in the audience that would like to respond to my question, please raise your hand. You're more than welcome to. So the first question that I want to ask the group is that a theme that I heard had to do with, so one theme was the interaction with EDAM, and given the importance of EDAM and regional coordination that I heard, that we all share. I want to ask you a follow-up question, and if it's all right, I'll pick on Mary first just to get us started, if you don't mind. So Mary, let me ask you, if the interaction with EDAM is important, do you, and you mentioned that there were some unresolved issues and questions. Do you feel, and Carrie raised a couple approaches. I heard Carrie say, hey, let's extend this initiative, work through some of those issues while EDAM is implemented. And I also heard her emphasize, let's gain experience with EDAM and then see how maybe these implementation or, whether it's policy or implementation, it can be a very thin line. So let's say these issues are resolved. Do you have an opinion on how do we resolve these issues, and how do we do it in a way that is best supports the EDAM? Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, I think part of and we kind of had a little bit of a light bulb moment, after that energy strategies came and presented their most recent study, and sort of really kind of tied a lot of the benefits associated with EDAM to the imbalance reserve product, and that's when we really kind of started digging into some of these connections and some of these issues, and started coming up with a lot more questions and answers maybe on kind of how those things are tied together. So I think even if you even if you are not fully convinced that the imbalance reserve product is necessary to achieve the benefits of EDAM, it does seem like nonetheless these things are kind of very tied together. And so I think we're looking to hopefully learn from the NOAA implementation of the Flex Reserve product, and kind of see how these things evolve operationally before we can kind of make updates and changes to them. you know, the DAME in particular has undergone, I think, I don't know if it's 4 or 5 years of stakeholder process, something like that. And so I sort of struggle with more process getting to a better result after you've undergone that much process already. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I feel like, you know, I don't know that PGP has a particular perspective on whether or not more stakeholdering would be productive or not. But I do think that as EDAM is implemented, as we see the, you know, how it's working, that we can kind of turn back around and look at where improvements can be made and kind of learn from doing versus more stakeholder engagement.
Kathleen, this is
Thank you,
Carrie.
Mary.
Can I add to what Mary
Carrie,
said to
please.
respond? Yeah.
Please do.
This is Carrie Bentley, WPTF. So adding on to what Mary said in the connection to EDAM, you know, I think we view EDAM and DAME as stacked benefits, not tied benefits. So we believe that both are building blocks to kind of a better regional organization, but that they don't need to be tied together and that they are severable. So I would agree that ideally the stakeholder processes would have turned out where they were completely finished at the same time. And they both had perfect proposals and we were ready to go forward. But I think in this case, despite 5 years of stakeholder process, well, the reality is EDAM came in midway through that. And the whole goal of the imbalance reserve has changed. And I think we're pushing DAME artificially through because EDAM's ready. And WPTF does believe EDAM is at a place, it is ready, but we don't believe DAME is. But I don't think that means that those blocks can't be stacked and those benefits can't both accrue together. We just don't think they should be so linked that it you know, ends up perhaps risking, for example, EDAM implementation because DAME isn't ready and EDAM is. So we really do see them as building blocks and not this knot that needs to be tied together. I don't know, Mary, if you would agree with that.
I'm not sure, but I think we kind of basically saying the same thing, that you know, if the benefits of the EDAM are sort of reliant upon the imbalance reserve product being in place, it doesn't prevent you from moving forward with EDAM first, but it may prevent the realization of those benefits that I think in part people may be relying upon to join EDAM. So I think I agree with you, but I also think it's complex when you start to think about the expectations, or you know, what people are expecting to get out of EDAM versus what they might get with EDAM without DAME, if that makes sense. So,
yeah.
So I agree with you, but I also think that there's more complexity there too.
Yeah, I think that's really a helpful perspective for us as an organization because, you know, in my little talk, I offered up 2 options. You know, one would be to do a zonal simplified approach that you implement concurrent with EDAM. And, you know, the benefit study, zonal is fine, you get all the same benefits. Nodal is completely irrelevant of the benefits. So I think what I hear you saying, and I think informs WPTF's position, is that we believe they should go forward together. We should just do it with a zonal approach and a simplified approach to try and get those benefits immediately.
Yeah, that's really great. That's super helpful, Carrie and Mary. I want to kind of pivot and see if there's, let me see if there's any other participants and hand raised, and if not, I'm going to ask a follow-up question of Arnie. Arnie, do you mind joining us again on video? And what I'd like to tease out is you mentioned in your slides this idea of this dependency that we're talking about. So is DAME needed for EDAM, or is EDAM needed for DAME? And I think that Mary and Carrie were kind of parsing that out. Can you share a little bit more of your perspective on, if we were to think about the best practice of how do we go about it? Carrie just gave a proposal for how both can be implemented in a lockstep. and get the benefits that were in the EDAM benefits report. Do you have an opinion on whether or not that approach makes sense, and or why we might want to take more time with DAME in an extended market footprint, as opposed to maybe going with DAME and then EDAM?
Kathleen, happy to. So I think that I actually thought the back and forth between that we just heard was really helpful between Carrie and Mary. It was really helpful. And I think this is a nice kind of refinement of our position. If we were just talking about imbalance reserves, so the product that's in the IFM, then I'm open to Carrie's suggestion that for that product, moving forward zonally, along with EDAM, could be a path forward. I think then, for me, the next question is, is that a product that should be provided through the day-ahead market, or is it like the other ancillary services where for EDAM, we're going to have each BAA do their own acquisition of the reserve service for their own BAA? And I think you could do it either way. I think there are probably arguments on both sides to say it's an uncertainty product. The uncertainty is connected both to the load and the resources you're bringing into EDAM. Arguably, that is something that will be unique to each BAA. And so having each BAA handle the reserve product by itself, just like we're going to do for the other reserve product, makes sense. The diversity benefit of managing uncertainty across a larger footprint, I bet there are values to doing that. In my mind, I bet there are also values to doing ancillary services across a wider footprint. So I have a hard time separating it.
I think we just lost Arnie for a second. So let me pivot, and if Arnie comes back, we'll let Arnie finish his thought. Lindsay, do you have a question you want to jump in on?
Yes, I had a quick question for Carrie. I thought I thought your speech was really interesting, and I was wondering if you had any theories with the uncertainty that is, I guess, has been proposed to be procured with imbalance reserve products. If you've had any theories on what that might do to real-time prices, or how that might change the market? Yeah,
that's a really interesting, very technical question, actually. Yeah. Okay, so theoretically, what's going on right now in ROC, what's happening is long start resources are being committed after the IFM clears. So the key to long start resources is that if you commit them at PMIN, that energy that's up to PMIN, that price doesn't get into the real-time market. For resource just that sits at PMIN, it doesn't matter what their marginal bid is. Basically, that PMIN energy gets into the real time for free. So if you just imagine a classic supply-demand chart and you get more supply for free, that lowers the price. And so what we saw happening, back maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we both had operators starting to bias ROC a lot more concurrent with EIM, really launching. So all of a sudden in real time, we have all this PMIN energy in and better resources and more optimal resources through the EIM. So we saw the real-time price crash. The theory is that if you move that long start commitment into the IFM and you have a reserve product on top of that, ideally the IFM price in most situations on average would actually lower. And that PMIN energy would be more optimally priced and load would receive the benefit of that long start commitment that they're not seeing right now in the IFM. So you would see a change where the real-time price potentially would maybe stay the same. You're still getting the same energy in there, but you might see a lowering of the IFN price. And then, that's all else being equal. So we have a lot of things like, okay, are we going to over procure? Are we going to under procure? How will it change congestion? But that's kind of how to start to think about your question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that response. And I was also wondering real quick, with the interplay with stuck, one of the things I've been wondering about with the imbalanced reserve product is whether or not, I guess, stuck would decommit resources after they've been committed from the imbalanced reserve. Maybe a bunch of resources, a bunch of resources would be online at PMN. Then I was kind of wondering, well, if stuck isn't procuring the same level of uncertainty, then would it decommit a bunch of resources right before the real-time actual run?
So I think that the really interesting thing about the imbalance product is it won't lead to that much of a difference in the real time, because right now you're getting those same resources already committed in ROC. So on most days, you're still going to have your real-time must offer obligation. The EDM, EIM entities will probably still bid in pretty similar. So your resource set is going to be the same in real time. Ideally, you're just going to get maybe a little bit more economic energy and not self-scheduled energy. But real time, when you start thinking about the stock and whether we're going to have appropriate amounts of ramping, that's when the flexible ramping product really comes into play. And so I think maybe you're asking more of a FRP question than an IR question. But it also depends on how you're appropriately setting up the day ahead market. So another way to answer your question would be to say, okay, we're predicting uncertainty and we're trying to make it deliverable, but we've completely under predicted the need for long start resources on the coast because we didn't account for that solar uncertainty. Well, now when you get into real time, you can no longer commit those long start resources, and stock is not a long enough horizon to commit those long start resources. So now you have severe congestion and maybe some reliability issues on the coast. So it's that kind of trade-off between predicting uncertainty and getting the right resources online in the right location, and under predicting, that over and under prediction of where you need the resources. I think that, really comes into play in the real time. But very technical questions. It sounds simple, but I don't think it is. No, I think they're great questions. I think that's one of my issues with the stakeholder process is that we haven't had a single proposal for long enough to actually ask and answer those questions. Ideally, I would sit and think about your question for hours on behalf of WPTF and then get back to the CAISO. But we haven't had time for that because, we've had 3 major proposal changes in the last 3 drafts. So it was time to think about actual practical good questions like the one you just asked.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm done. Yeah, I think those are, and echo that. Thank you, Lindsay. Why don't I take this opportunity to see, Meg, are there any questions in the chat?
Kathleen, yes, there is one question in the chat, and it is from my colleague Bonnie Blair, who represents the 6 cities. Her question is for Mary, and Bonnie is asking Mary to please provide some more information on how imbalance reserves would be implemented conservatively. I think that was part of Mary's comments at the beginning. And what would be the attributes of conservative implementation of imbalance reserves?
Great, thank you, Meg.
Thanks, great question. I don't have enough of the technical details to fully answer that question, and I think it's a good question. So maybe there's further dialogue that can happen on that. I think the concept is just to, to the extent there's options to implement things in such a way that allows us to kind of see how they're working before we move forward. I think that's the concept, but we're happy to kind of take that back and make some more specific suggestions if that would be helpful.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Barry. Well, why don't I open that question up to the other speakers as well? So just to repeat, the question being, if you were to implement conservatively DAME, in your mind, what does a conservative implementation look like? Are there any other speakers that want to jump in?
I feel like I've talked a lot,
And Carrie,
Kathleen, but I
yeah,
will. I can respond to that.
I was like, you've said it. Do you want, I can recap it for you. I can tell you what I'm hearing you say and then check my comprehension. Why don't we do that? So I've heard you say a couple times that a zonal implementation is your view of what would be a conservative implementation out of the gate. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's very fair. I would say like a nodal is like going 90 miles per hour on a freeway, and it will be really hard to stop once we go down that path. We should start slow, 5 miles an hour, start with zonal, upward direction only. There's no evidence we need downward, right? Like, let's keep it simple. We could do zonal, then we don't have to do nodal and rock. It eliminates, I would say, 80% of our issues. It eliminates 80% of the complexity. So conservative from a market standpoint would be zonal and upward only, and then conservative from an implementation standpoint would be zonal and upward only. I would say it's conservative because it's tested by other ISOs. We wouldn't be the first ISO in the country trying to do it. It's conservative based on how hard we know nodal implementation is, based on our experience with the FRP, which technology at the CAISO has really struggled with. So when you talk about, mitigating risks, to us, it's not just zonal, but it's also eliminating this downward addition that no one has asked for or, shown is needed.
And Carrie, can we lean in a bit on that? Because I know that we've heard, and one thing we're encouraging is the why. So we've heard downward isn't needed a couple of times. You have the mic right now, so I'll ask this, but I know a couple others, Arnie has mentioned that, and Sergio, I don't recall if you specifically talked to it, but let's get you kind of lined up as well on any thoughts on this. But first, Carrie, the why. It's easy to say downward's not needed, but there's a technical reason downward is not necessarily needed. Can you unpack that for the group?
Yeah, I would say there's two reasons. One, remember the goal of DAME, it's to get out-of-market actions into the IFM. Well, operators aren't, in RUC, they're not turning resources down. They are upping their requirement in RUC and trying to get more resources online, not less. And the CAISO did an analysis and they looked at RUC operator bias and they looked at imbalance needs, and only very, very rarely, one out of thousands and thousands and thousands of instances, did they ever need anything in the downward direction. And I don't believe in the past 2 years, the operators have biased in the downward direction at all. So from a simply goal of the initiative, the downward product doesn't meet the goal because there's no out-of-market downward bias going on. And then two, from just a pure kind of market perspective, since DAME started, we've talked about it's been 5 years. We've had tens of thousands of megawatts of renewables come online, and thermal went from self-scheduling a lot of the time to now economically bidding. And practically speaking, what that means is if you have renewables and thermal economically offering in the real-time market, that's another name for downward flexibility, because the market can just turn those down. So there's no need for a product and to pay for a product in day ahead for something you're already getting in real time for free.
Great, thank you, Carrie. Do any other speakers want to respond to that question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Yeah,
sorry. Yes, we can.
I might keep my video off for the short answer just to stay connected. The only other thing I'll add is to Carrie's point, which I think is spot on about the down product, is if the value, if there is always going to be, or virtually always going to be enough downward resource capability, available in real time, and you had a product in real time for that, the price of that's almost always going to be zero. And it would be funny to have a day-ahead product that didn't have a zero price, that was always clearing against a real-time product that had a zero price almost all the time. And so I even kind of question what the price signals are if you had a day-ahead product that had a price that was non-zero, a meaningful amount of the time.
Great, thank you, Arnie. Appreciate that. If it's all right, I know we're getting a couple hands raised, so let me go. Silas, can you unmute Stuart Kelly? Can we start with Stuart Kelly?
Thank you, Kathleen. Stuart Kelly representing LA. Just a little bit of a counter proposal. I think there was a lot of reasonable arguments certainly made. I personally can't envisage EDAM starting without imbalance reserve. I think both need to go together. Otherwise, you probably need a change to the EDAM design, and I think that's particularly so when we have this concept of equal priority to load. I think the one thing that Nodal does look at that gives certainly me some comfort is the deliverability aspects. I recognise that as you move from day ahead to real time, the congestion patterns, may change, and I'm sure there's empirical evidence out there that these congestion patterns do change. I don't know how much empirical evidence there is out there in terms of congestion changing during a startup phase. I also recognise that there's LMP impacts when we discuss the pricing signals, but I don't know how many folks are going to make investment decisions based on the initial pricing that's coming out of EDAM, knowing it's in an evolution state and likely will join. I think one thing that was kind of interesting around the whole stakeholder process, I think Kaiser did a tremendous job in getting stakeholder input, and I think as I reflect back to EIM and what happened then and compare that to the EDAM and the DAME initiatives, there was a lot of great input from a number of different parties that was eloquently put, and I think I did note was that Kaiser was more to that input, particularly these initiatives, and I think to scare some of the important concessions, particularly around the demand things from particularly, I'm sure we can draw lessons learned as we stakeholder process. I think from an really want to start that in the most risk mitigated way, particularly again as IM and where it's come from and been part of that initial startup and some of the concerns that I may have had here. And I think this is getting struck as best it possibly can, but it's not perfect. Particularly important, and I'll be listening very careful from a Kaiser perspective. I know Kaiser does monitor things, and that's part of the process, but I think it's going to be critical here that monitor the evolution of the EDAM startup and these DAME changes, and is already committed to make some changes if things aren't working particularly well. I think while I welcome the quantile regression approach, I think there is a danger of over or under procurement, and that's something that we definitely need to measure and be prepared to change. I think also as we look at maybe things that are falling short, I think from a RIF perspective, I'm sure RIF already has surgically go through the, which I think gets reviewed in just over a month to see what needs to change to build on what's already and taken forward, by Kaiser to the board in February 1. Again, I think it's a balance together two worlds. There's going to be seams issues, but all in all, a risk managed way. From a purist standpoint, it's not perfect. I get it, but I think that's just the nature of the beast. But thank you for giving me the time.
No, of course, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I think a lot of them are very well taken. I'll just emphasize the lessons learned from EIM. We went live with EIM, learned a lot. We had an EIM enhancement phases, at least one, I can't remember how many after that, in short order, I think the very next year. So Stuart's making, thank you for raising that. I think that's really informative. on kind of how important it is to monitor and then be mindful of needing to address them in short order. So thank you for raising some of your thoughts. And you can feel free, if you're still unmuted, to respond to this, and I'm going to open it, also ask other speakers. But the deliverability one is one we haven't talked about enough yet during this session, so let's dive in a little bit deeper. One of the other reasons, in addition to Carrie was mentioning, okay, the main goal is to replace or mitigate or reduce the need for operator conformances, low conformance. But the other one that has been cited for the nodal is because of the deliverability. And Stuart, so thank you for raising this one. So I think I've heard other speakers question whether or not nodal is necessary to mitigate the deliverability risk in real time. Can you explain why you think it might be a nice element of the proposal to have a nodal in day ahead, and why you think that that helps deliverability, even though you know the congestion patterns change? And let's just make sure Stuart is still unmuted in case he can respond.
Yeah, I think I would answer it this way. I think it's important that we have some measure of deliverability, particularly during startup. I think EDAM has to be reliable. I recognize that, you know, congestion patterns will change, but the reliability component for me is probably the most important. And absent that, until you run the market, you're not really, there's nothing else that's looking at that deliverability aspect prior to the market run. So that's why I think it's important. I think also that there's a lot of design changes here with all the various initiatives that we're trying to bring together. So there's definitely some unknowns. So I think we have to enter this in the most risk mitigated way. You know, nodal may be better for, you know, different reasons, and I don't mean to go against what Carrie's saying, but I personally prefer the deliverability aspect. I don't think it's going to change that much with the initial startup and the geographical, the lack of transfer capability, quite honestly, and I think that's just the best way forward.
Stuart, I'm going to give you a call. This is Carrie. So I think, you know, I just want to make sure that everyone knows WPTF's position, because our position is that IR needs to be deliverable, but we believe that zones allow you to respect transfer constraints between BAA areas, respect the congestion patterns and major transmission constraints that are predictable, and then also better forecast where uncertainty materializes. Because it's really hard to do nodally. So we agree with you that it needs to be deliverable from day one. We just believe that zonal is a better methodology. If you read the CAISO's, you know, I guess, defense of nodal, you'll note that they talk about day ahead deliverability a lot. And frankly, we don't think day ahead deliverability is a sensical concept. We have virtuals in the CAISO. You know, you can't deliver a virtual. So congestion pattern changes aren't trivial. What that means is we care about where that physical resource is going to show up in real time, and we want it to be deliverable. And we're going to prioritize that over some abstract kind of day ahead deliverability concept. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that our position is the same as yours. It needs to be deliverable, but we mean that in a very like concrete real-time way, not a theoretical clears the market way.
Definitely good to. I get concerned about folks want to move away from nodal, leads to market power mitigation and, you know, lower our shortfall that seem to be more of a driver away from nodal rather than the reliability component. So it'll be good to chat. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Our position really is about the reliability, and I kind of feel like it's been misrepresented by the CAISO and their response to us. So I would appreciate that chance. Thanks.
And let me catch that one other. Oh, yeah, please jump in.
Oh, sorry. And this is Mike Wilding. And Carrie, I wanted to ask you a question and follow up on something that you said, if that's okay. you know, because the deliverability is very important to Pacific Corp as well. We, you know, basically we think if the imbalanced reserve product is not deliverable, it really doesn't, you know, fulfill its purpose or you know, achieve the goals of the initiative. And so I think I heard you say, you know, going nodal day one live is like going 90 miles an hour on the freeway. And you talked about having zones that were granular enough to ensure that deliverability. And, you know, I think if I understand you right, we would have to, as EDAM evolved and, you know, that would have to be constantly monitored to make sure we had those zones right. And so is WPTF open to, I mean, to ever move into a nodal, or do you think that's just too far? Or is it, let's start with a zonal, let's make sure, you know, let's keep reviewing and monitoring, make sure we have the zones right so that there is deliverability. And in the future, if we ever need to move to nodal, we can think about that and do that then, but let's keep it simple right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, our proposal is to definitely start with well-defined zones that we think will lead to a deliverable outcome in real time. If we ever get to a point where we could forecast uncertainty well enough to get to a nodal level, we would be in favor of it. But the difference is being able to say, I think that solar plant has this level of uncertainty versus I think all of solar in Bakersfield has this level of uncertainty. And I know how to forecast that broader zone and how to say, yeah, you know, we need about 500 megawatts for that area. I have no idea how to forecast individual nodal uncertainty. And I don't think anyone does. And so it's not just how you're enforcing the transmission constraints, it's also which transmission constraints are you enforcing. And I think before the CAISO has enough experience with EDAM to know which transmission constraints to really worry about, there's no way to reasonably go to nodal. That is like 90 miles an hour on the freeway, maybe going the wrong direction. Like let's.
Yeah. So
yeah.
If I could maybe put another way, I mean, I think what I hear you say is that there's a disconnect between using a nodal approach right now. There's a disconnect between how the imbalanced reserve product would be delivered and how the uncertainty would be calculated. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. Yep. And my proposal is to, you know, let's start with what we know how to do and we know most of the time will be deliverable and monitor for it and enforce different constraints as needed. And we know how to do that because we've been doing it for years with AS. And for the most part, we've been able to make that deliverable, like all ISOs do. So, you know, the whole walk before you run thing.
Great, no, thank you. Yes, Arnie, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna, just one follow-up on that. And I think this has been a super valuable back and forth. You know, I think in my mind, you know, if the question is, how do we most accurately ensure deliverability? You know, I think it dovetails well with what Carrie was saying. My gut is zonal is going to be more accurate in the near term, and than the deployment scenarios that they're using now. Once we get experience with zonal, and maybe those zones evolve over time, and through that evolution, we got to the point that we got comfortable that deployment scenarios on a nodal level could be accurate. But I have a hard time imagining we'll get to the level of accuracy necessary if we start with nodal rather than starting with zone.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Arnie, for that last thought. I'm just looking at time and we've actually eaten into our break. So what I'm going to do next is there is one last chat from Richard's side asking if a reserve product was delayed 12 months after EDAM went live, what would be the risk in terms of price formation and market participant behavior? And if it's all right with the speakers, I will take the opportunity just to share one thought or two thoughts before I close this out for the break for Richard. I think it's a great question. It deviated a little bit from what the group was talking about, which was a simplification of the design that could go in with EDAM, so there would not be a delay. I think originally we heard kind of two options of maybe delay and then or implement something that was workable along the same time. I hear a preference on implement at the same time, so that's why the conversation went that way. But if the alternative were to be adopted to extend the initiative and delay it, I think what you would see is that the concerns about the load bias will continue at the same levels that we are, levels or maybe higher, but that we are seeing today. So the goal is to try to mitigate the use of load biasing by introducing a new product that can meet the operator's needs. If that's delayed, then I think we're kind of more at a status quo going forward. From a price formation perspective, it means that RUC bias, as Carrie mentioned, does have an impact on the amount of supply, increasing it, and then resulting in suppressed prices in real time because of the oversupply condition going into real time. So all of the reasons that the initiative, these two are important reasons, we would see it likely continue. So the risks that I just want to note that Richard wanted to highlight that there are risks, and what are they, is that we can remain with status quo. I think that the main conversation that we heard today was how do we have this new product implemented at the same time as an EDAM in a way that's workable, and I think it was really productive. So I want to thank all the speakers for volunteering. I know that we had scheduled 10-minute break. I'm going to ask, is anyone opposed, or Lindsay, are you all right if we push and still take the 10 minutes and start 5 after, or do you want to start sharply at 2? It's up to you. I think you're muted. I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Double muted. Yes, we can go ahead and take the 10 minutes. I think that's fine.
Okay, we'll be back. Let's take a 10.
Yeah, we'll be back at 2:05.
Great. Thank you. Thanks all.
Hi, everyone. Thank you and welcome back. Our next session is on EDAM. And again, we had a significant amount of speakers interested in speaking on this topic. So we split it into two sections, just like the day ahead market enhancements. So to kick things off, we can go ahead and move to the next slide. We have Pam Sporborg from Portland General Electric.
Lindsay, I appreciate the opportunity to speak here and also your accommodation of some of my own scheduling challenges. So I'm Pam Sporborg. I'm the Director of Transmission and Market Services for Portland General Electric. And I first want to say that my comments here today are about the EDAM market design itself and do not reflect a decision of Portland General to either participate in the EDAM or any day-ahead market. That is a decision we are currently evaluating and looking at the specifics application of the EDAM design to our balancing authority and customer base. So these are comments that are more generically about the EDAM design itself. So PGE has been an active participant in the EDAM design from its initiation, and we appreciate the time that the ISO has taken to form work groups, gather significant input, and really get a lot of stakeholder comments and perspectives on the different components of the EDAM design. We also recognize there's a lot of different perspectives among the stakeholder community on the different aspects of EDAM. And we appreciate that the final proposal strikes a balance between those stakeholder interests and provides an opportunity to move the EDAM forward. We think that there is significant potential in the EDAM design around really enabling the region to incrementally expand the opportunities of organized markets. Much like the EIM, when it was initiated, there are certain compromises in the design, and those opportunities are enable for an area for future growth and enhancements. So PGE appreciates that the EDAM design represents a balance of recognizing that the value in the market is in providing more coordinated dispatch across a greater footprint and really enabling the co-optimization of resources across that greater footprint. But it also recognizes that transmission is a key component here, and the design reduces the friction between balancing authorities and different transmission providers, while also incentivizing the continued procurement of long-term transmission rights. I think that's an important balance that the market design has struck in order to ensure that we can get that benefit or try to capture the benefits of co-optimization across a broader footprint while not cannibalizing the long-term subscription to transmission products. The subscription model and the OAT is a really core component of cost recovery for the value of transmission assets. And we think the EDAM threads the right balance, or strikes the right balance between the need to continue to have an incentive to maintain transmission, as well as to reduce the friction between balancing authorities. We also appreciate the opportunities around to really provide that broader expansion to potentially help reduce greenhouse gases, much in the way the EIM provided a good opportunity for renewables integration and provided some of the real-time opportunities and tools that help integrate renewables. We think there's significant potential in the EDAM to do the same thing through closer coordination across the broader footprint to really be able to rely on and enhance the ability of the region to do the deep decarbonization that many of our states and utilities have made commitments to. We also appreciate the collaboration and the dialogue that is taking place here today, and the opportunities to really extend the principles of resource efficiency into the day-ahead market, and the balance of the need for everyone to come fully sufficient with the opportunity to optimize over that broader footprint. We think a lot of the components of the design really do strike that balance, and we are looking forward to the continued participation in this process and the dialogue that will continue here today.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead and advance the slide to our next speaker, Arnie Quinn from Vistra. And I believe he has a slide deck, so we can move it to the next slide again. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Lindsay, can you hear me? Great. All right. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So, Vistra supports any effort that advances the benefits of competitive markets to a broader geographic region. And we're very hopeful that EDAM and SPP Markets Plus participants will see the benefits of regional markets and use that platform as a step to a full RTO. In our mind, that is the end goal. And in our mind, either the EDAM or SPP Markets Plus are if they're a confidence building effort to get to that end goal, then we're supportive. There are some specific elements of the EDAM design that give us pause, specifically around the greenhouse gas design, the resource sufficiency test, and the residual unit commitment run. And those concerns are really, again, our perspective as an internal California generator is that those elements could put internal California cleaner emitting generation at an inappropriate competitive disadvantage, and could undervalue resource adequacy resources in California who are marketing forward firm supply by allowing California to either get the benefits of RUC in the backstop capacity benefit of RUC, or by trading through the resource sufficiency platform. We do question whether the CAISO transmission proposal is consistent with long-standing open access principles and whether it avoids the inappropriate confiscation of third-party transmission rights. I'm not going to talk a lot about that today because the other two issues are a much bigger issue for us as a company. Next slide, please. So on the greenhouse gas design, again, very much the perspective of we own a carbon emitting resource inside of California. That carbon emitting resource is subject to the California greenhouse gas rules, and we approach this as just wanting to be able to be on a level playing field with other emitting resources across the EDAM footprint. We think that any day-ahead greenhouse gas approach has to really cannot allow a higher emitting external resource to displace a lower emitting California generator. And we also think that you want to only extend GHG compliance to resources likely to be awarded to support a net import into California. And we can only have confidence that that's going to happen if there's a reasonable baseline setting what surplus means. We are very cognizant of the fact that no matter what you do in terms of greenhouse gas design, you are creating a fiction, because the EDAM footprint will be one big soup, and we're going to be attempting to decide, which carrot is meeting load in a non-GHG region versus whether that carrot is being served to load in the GHG region. And so we appreciate perfection here as it can't be the goal and will never be the goal because of just the inherent difficulty and the inherent fiction around kind of deeming resources. That said, we are concerned that building on the current greenhouse gas design that's used in EIM will, where those maybe some flaws were small, will become big when you move them into EDAM. And I've listed out the flaws here. I don't want to go into them in too much detail just because I don't want to take up too much of my 5 minutes. But they all go to the degree to which the baseline is reasonable and resources deemed to be supporting net import into California are appropriate. And we do recognize, again, that California has tried, especially with the net exporting constraint. We just don't know that it's going to go quite far enough. Next slide, please. And then finally, I wanted to talk about the elements of the design that give us some pause as a seller of RA in California. And from that perspective, someone who believes that there should be a strong signal to appropriately invest in forward resources. We believe, that the EDAM has to have a strong resource efficiency test because, in some sense, there's this absence of footprint-wide resource adequacy programs, and we don't want EDAM to undermine the incentives, again, as an internal generator in California, the incentives that California would have for forward planning and procurement. The elements of the EDAM design that we think might muddy the water between resource adequacy and resource efficiency and might weaken California's desire to appropriately firm up supply include the fact that there'll be a RUC that's run across the entire EDAM footprint. And in our mind, the RUC, as it's run now, is California's backstop resource adequacy. So when that's extended to the rest of the EDAM, we see, some merging of resource adequacy constructs with resource efficiency. We are concerned that the trading of obligations, both demand and uncertainty between BAAs, could create an incentive for California ISO to trade what we would think is an inferior product because it's just being made available on a daily basis at a lower cost that would reduce the incentive to procure and ensure that California ISO is resource efficient by buying an RA equivalent contract. And then because we think there are some weaknesses in the resource efficiency test, we are worried that allowing a BAA to be kind of pooled into a group of BAAs for purposes of the real-time sufficiency test based on passing the day-ahead test could be inappropriate. And finally, this is probably a smaller concern for us, but maybe worth noting, is for the purposes of the resource efficiency test, a little concern that a BAA's ability to hold back capacity could maybe create a self-reinforcing behavior as other BAAs now have fewer resources available to it through EDAM. And so the sense that, there's a maybe free rider of if I make my resources available to everyone else, they can take the benefit of it, but if I hold them back for myself, they won't be available to everyone. Just worry that becomes self-reinforcing as the supply of additional resources becomes smaller and smaller if BAAs hold back too much capacity. And with that, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnie. Okay, we can go ahead and move on to the next speaker. We have Russ Mantefel from Bonneville Power Administration. Russ?
Hi, all. Can you hear me fine?
Yep.
Good. Hi, Russ Mantefel. I'm the Director of Market Initiatives at BPA, and don't have the slides, and I'll probably just take a few minutes. And I think my discussion probably could have gone in any of the panels. I think at a high level, BPA sees EDAM and any Market Plus development as being positive and being a forward step in regionalization and regional coordination that we think is important. Ultimately, we think that the most efficient place for the region to land may very well be beyond a day-ahead market as is currently being contemplated by EDAM and Markets Plus, and having a platform that you can build on a longer term basis, we think is very important. And that probably implicates some of the governance discussions earlier. We think that having a governance structure that is really equally representative of all the participants irrespective of where they're located or the nature of their organization. We think is important. To that extent, we think that the GRC proposals are also very progressive and are positive, but would still like to see more of a push to see changes made that would enable the CAISO to really, or a success organization, really meet those objectives. In terms of EDAM itself, once again, it is a step forward, and I think that more collaboration on a day-to-day basis ought to provide benefits. We do see that there are some issues that the CAISO, the RIF, and the board should continue to work on. One of them is SEAMS coordination and an agreement recognizing that EDAM will be moving forward in an otherwise bilateral WEC in terms of the day-ahead market outside of CAISO. Once again, looking at governance and continuing to put a high priority on making sure that the organization is built around a framework that's representative of all of the jurisdictions and all of the entities on an equal basis. Resource adequacy and resource efficiency, some of these concepts have been touched on as well, but really trying to address the diversity in terms of the way that entities plan for and maintain reliability, and ensuring that everybody is meeting their responsibilities while also trying to obtain the benefits of diversity across the region. Transmission is another issue that we think would still be worth looking at. I think that the EDAM proposal builds on the EIM proposal, which makes sense, but there are still a lot of questions about efficient access to transmission and effective and fair compensation for the use of transmission, and for those that acquire rights for transmission. And I think that that should be an area that the RIF and others continue to focus on. And I think that the use of market power mitigation, which came up in the discussion about zonal versus nodal, I think that still looking at the philosophy behind the identification and application of market power and mitigation of it should be something that the CAISO should look at. And then CARB is another issue. Our GHG accounting is another issue where we think continued work on that would be beneficial. One area we want to focus on is that as EDAM moves forward, it will be moving forward in a region that is really multifaceted in terms of different jurisdictions and different market participation. This will be the first instance of just a day-ahead market, and as PacifiCorp has announced and intends to move forward, just as we saw with EIM, there are a lot of questions that are still unanswered just by looking at the EDAM proposal, in that there are going to be a lot of other impacted entities that will be interacting on a commercial and an operational basis with the EDAM, not just at the California border, but at the border of all the EDAM entities. And we think it's really important for that to be an area of focus for everybody, because there are a lot of operational policy issues that come about as that can't be contemplated or are not contemplated in the EDAM proposal. Also, I think realizing the likelihood that there will be two market operators in the same footprint, and encouraging the CAISO to be proactive about looking at how it would work with a peer market operator which probably in the case of in the form of Southwest Power Pool. So those are just issues that we think are important to look at, and Bonneville in particular, given what I discussed earlier in terms of our general position in terms of market development, we're not at this point in time evaluating joining EDAM. We're participating in the Markets Plus process, and would continue to hope that California in general moves forward with evaluating the governance framework to allow it to be representative of everybody that might possibly move forward with market development in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Russ. Okay, we can go ahead and move to our last speaker in this section. Yes, Jeff Spires from PowerX. Jeff, are you available?
Thanks, Lindsay. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Maybe we'll just start here. So first of all, good afternoon, and I'd also just like to thank the RIF for putting this on and for allowing me the opportunity to participate. I think the dialogue so far has been great. The nature of my comments today are actually focusing on one area where somewhat along the lines of what Russ was alluding to towards the end of his comments. What are some of the areas in terms of where EDAM design impacts Western participants, and in particular, my focus is on respecting the OAT priority within the EDAM marketplace. And at a high level, PowerX's view is that any organized market in the West really needs to strike the right balance between enabling the efficient use of the transmission system for market transactions, while at the same time respecting the priority of OAT rights that entities are seeking to use outside of the market. And that second priority really is crucial to allow entities to continue to invest in OAT rights and be able to use those rights to make the forward purchases and sales that they rely on today, and for the TSPs in the West to maintain that important revenue stream that they receive by making those sales. We can move to the next slide, please. So while this general principle of respecting OAT priority is not exclusive to the RAP program, RAP interoperability is a key area of concern because the RAP program is founded on the principle that OAT rights will be respected to ensure deliverability and ultimately to protect reliability. And so this is a critical topic for us. And in that context, this matrix illustrates the categories of RAP transactions that need consideration, both from a priority of supply and a priority of transmission perspective. And much of the conversation to date on RAP interoperability has focused on the operational program, where entities can access diversity through holdback requests. But my focus today is on the left side of this chart. This bucket covers all the potential forward transactions that entities might be making to meet their RAP obligations 7 months ahead of time, or even beyond that. In our view, this is a much larger bucket of transactions, and therefore it's really the most important category in terms of requiring careful consideration, ensuring that those types of transactions can continue to be made. So if we move to the next slide, taking a further step into those forward transactions, there are two subcategories that you might be able to think of those. The first type is forward fixed blocks of energy. And I'm not going to spend time on those. The EDAM proposal enables entities to self-schedule energy in the day-ahead market and receive the priority of their OAT rights for those transactions. So what I really want to narrow in on is that second type. This is a broad category, but it's very important. It includes variable energy resources like wind and solar, dispatchable hydro, dispatchable gas plants, capacity transactions, flexible reserves, et cetera. And the key attribute of these types of transactions is that they rely on OAT rights to support energy deliveries that can vary in real time. Next slide, please. So I just want to very quickly walk through an example to illustrate what the issue is that we see in the EDAM proposal. So imagine, just as a starting point to lay the foundation, and a RAP participant outside of the EDAM footprint contracts for 100 megawatt wind farm and 100 megawatts of firm rights across an EDAM BA to deliver that resource back to their load. So on a forward basis, it's going into the RAP forward showing. It's using ELCC to calculate its capacity credit. But regardless of that, the fundamental assumption is that that entire resource can be delivered back to that entity's load. using those firm rights. And so assume that once we get into the operating time frame, the entity submits a day-ahead schedule using its 100 megawatts of firm transmission to enable delivery of its hourly wind output back to its system. And that's the key in terms of the following examples, which is the entity is proactively scheduling on its rights, its transmission rights to enable that delivery. Next slide, please. So in today's world, let's assume on a day-ahead basis, the wind forecast is 30 megawatts. What you see on the right side of this chart is that the entity submits a day-ahead E-tag with two pieces of information on it. A transmission profile of 100 megawatts, representing the amount of transmission it's scheduling, and an energy profile of 30 megawatts, reflecting the day-ahead forecast of wind. But of course, that is subject to change. So if we move to the next slide, now we're in real time, conditions have changed. Now the wind is forecast to be 100 megawatts for that upcoming hour. This is relatively straightforward in today's world. If we move to the next slide again, you can see that the customer updates their E-tag, increasing the transmission profile from 30 megawatts to 100 megawatts, fully energizing its previously scheduled 100 megawatts of transmission, and that entity gets the priority to flow on that path. So now if we move to the next slide, I will walk through how that differs under the EDAM proposal as we understand it. So prior to 9 a.m. day ahead, everything is the same. The customer submits the same E-tag, 100 megawatts of transmission, and 30 megawatts of energy representing the day ahead forecast. We move to the next slide. There is now a new step, which is the EDAM optimization in the day ahead time frame. Does two things. First of all, it will respect the 30 megawatts of energy that was self-scheduled day ahead, but it will see that there is the remaining 70 megawatts that is available to it for transfers. And so what could happen is that the EDAM therefore uses that transmission to create a transfer from BA1 to BA2 of 70 megawatts. So if we move to the next slide, what we see is when we get into real time, when the firm rights holder, as before, sees that their wind forecast has increased to 100 megawatts and tries to energize their previously scheduled transmission like earlier, we now have a potential problem. And the issue is that the EDAM proposal is to treat the 70 megawatts of EDAM transfers and the 70 megawatts of previously scheduled OAT rights that are energized in real time as equivalent. So the last slide in this example, if we move one more, is the market will try to redispatch, of course, to avoid cutting either schedule. We understand that. But in those critical periods, when it really matters, if curtailments are necessary on that path, those schedules would be curtailed pro rata. And the previously scheduled OAT rights would no longer provide that customer with the highest priority to flow. And in this numerical example, the wind would be curtailed down to 65 megawatts. So if we go to the last slide, I apologize for going over time, but I wanted to just walk through that example. But the fundamental point is the RAP program relies on NERC priority 6 or 7 transmission rights being respected to ensure deliverability. It's not just about day-ahead fixed blocks. I use the example of a wind farm because it's intuitive to understand that the energy profile is moving up and down, but this is a broad concern for many other transactions. You can think very quickly of things like dispatchable hydro or other plants where you need to be able to change the output in real time. It implicates all of those things. And in our view, it's critical to ensure that firm and conditional firm OAT rights that are scheduled by day ahead 9 a.m. so that the market has that information. It's critical that they're recognized and assigned the highest priority ahead of EDAM transfers that are effectively using the same ETC without a transmission reservation. So thank you for allowing me to go a little bit long there. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, we can move to the next slide. It's time for the peer-to-peer discussion. Oh, sorry, one more slide. Thank you. Okay, it's time for peer-to-peer discussion. So if you have a clarifying question or you'd like to make any comments, please raise your hand or submit a chat question and we will try to get to them. It looks like we do have one question already in queue. So could we unmute Shami Davis
Full night.
Shami, your line is unmuted.
Well, maybe we lost Shami, so I guess we can ping her and see and try to get her back later. Okay. I don't see any additional. Oh, we have Stuart Kelly. Could we go ahead and unmute Stuart's line?
Thanks, Lindsay. Jeff, just wanted to touch on your particular presentation. I think as things have evolved in EDAM, I've seen the transmission side of things evolve quite considerably. I think one of the concerns is to try and fix the issue that you've raised. It would probably lead to RAP having a higher priority than EDAM schedules, and I don't know if that's necessarily the right outcome. There's definitely pros and cons that go with that, for sure. I think one thing that EDAM entities are able to do, I think you had your example wheeling through a EDAM BA, they can choose their own path in terms of their OATs and changes to the OATs that support EDAM and how they want to deal with priorities or whatever. So that is available, but I actually feel that in trying to resolve the issue that you have raised, I feel it's more a market-to-market coordination issue that maybe as RAP, is working towards getting up and running here and working with CAISO. Given that these are most likely edge cases, I think maybe the best way to try and resolve this is maybe through some market-to-market coordination rather than a wholesale change that could be quite impactful for cases that are probably, they're very important, but they're fewer in occurrence. That would be my only observation on the particular issue you're raising.
Okay, I'll let Jeff respond if he would like to respond to that.
Well, probably the first reaction I have is to say, I don't think that this is about edge cases because, particularly in the context of RAP, but just in a general sense, we're talking about entities that are securing priority OAT rights because they care about the outcome in those critical periods. And so this really amounts to ensuring that they have that priority when it really matters the most. So if you want to, sort of refer to that as an edge case, I don't think that addresses that. What we're suggesting here is that when entities invest in those firm OAT rights and are trying to be able to bring forward contracts or external resources back to their system, they need to have confidence that they can do that when it matters the most. And what we're proposing here is that the bare minimum is that an entity that actually takes the step of scheduling their transmission rights on a day-ahead basis, for example, submitting the E-tag as I was walking through, they are using those rights. They're setting up an E-tag on a day-ahead basis and communicating their intent to the market to say, look, I've got a scheduled use of my transmission. I'm communicating that. I will be updating the energy in real time, and the market needs to respect that. So, trying to sort of narrow in on that example where the entity is taking that step to communicate that information and saying, at a bare minimum in those situations when that entity has done that, that's because they are using those rights that they've invested in, and they absolutely do have to get the priority that they're expecting.
I recognize the issue, and it's definitely an issue with bringing these two worlds together. That's for sure, and there's always trade-offs. I will be interested in how the OATs develop for EDAM participants that are also RAP participants and to see if there's, better mousetraps out there to alleviate the concern.
And I have a quick question, I guess, to pose this back to Jeff. Do you have a simple solution or any type of proposal of how you would protect this?
Well, thanks, Lindsay. I mean, I think as I read the current EDAM proposal, it describes this scenario, but the policy proposal associated with this scenario is, like I was explaining, to treat the EDAM transfer and the OAT schedule as equivalent from a priority perspective. So I think there are multiple solutions, provided that the outcome is that the entity using their OAT rights knows that they're getting priority. So, probably the most basic solution would be that if an entity submits that day-ahead transmission profile on an E-tag, then the market would carve that out and essentially not use that space on a day-ahead basis because it's already been scheduled by the OATS right holder. Probably another variation of that would be to produce a schedule, but an EDAM transfer, for example, but it would be of a lower priority. So the market would do that with the recognition that if the entity updates the energy profile in real time, that might require the EDAM transfer to be displaced, much like it works today when an entity relies on non-firm transmission. So there's multiple solutions, and I don't think we have a particularly strong view on exactly what the right technical solution is, but I think the principle that I was describing is what we feel is important to meet in terms of ensuring that those scheduled uses of transmission receive the priority that they're expecting.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, did you have anything else that you wanted to say?
Hey, I'm sorry, Lindsay.
Oh, yeah.
This is
Go ahead.
Doug Bochignone. I just want to jump in. I wanted to follow up on Jeff's example, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Can you go back to slide 58? I think that this is a great example, Jeff. I really appreciate it. I guess so. I'm thinking in this hour ahead example, assuming all the transmissions still available as was expected in the day ahead, it seems to me the market's going to clear and you don't have, it's not double booked, right? I mean, you'll have, that the resources will be redispatched in the hour ahead market, and the wind energy is going to flow, right? You're just setting up for what happens if subsequent to the real-time market, the transmission is curtailed. Is that right?
No, thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. What I'm saying is that the first thing that's happened here is an entity that has 100 megawatts of firm rights has scheduled those day ahead to be able to accommodate, in this example, a wind farm, but it could be anything. Let's call it, it could be a hydro facility, et cetera. When you get to the point now, looking, say, an hour ahead, and the wind has come up to 100 megawatts, now it is double booked from the perspective of that OAT rights holder is now bringing the full nameplate output of their wind, in this example, back to their system at the same time that there was an EDAM transfer relying on that space not having been used. So in my mind, it is double booked at that point in time. Now, I agree that prior to any curtailment, the market would try to redispatch around this situation and address it that way. But the concern we have is that in those critical moments when redispatch isn't enough to address a constraint, you've effectively got an EDAM transfer here of 70 megawatts that is using the same transmission transfer capability that the OATS right holder has invested in and is attempting to use, and then curtailing them pro rata, despite the fact that the EDAM transfer had no transmission reservation associated with it. It was merely using the part of that schedule that had not had energy put on it in the day ahead
Yeah.
timeframe.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, but I think when that hour ahead market runs, you know, if that wind is going in at a zero variable cost, it's going to displace the EDAM transfer or some other resource, and so it will clear. I think if the curtailment happened prior to that happening, I could see where the issue you described on the next slide could happen. But if the market's done the redispatch now in the 5-minute market or the 15-minute market and then the 5-minute market, the wind will be there and get that its original priority. I think the issue comes up: what do you do when in real time you actually get a curtailment? And I think you're raising a legitimate point about prioritization and issues that are created by treating the EDAM transfers as firm. And I think you suggested some potential solutions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Doug. You know, I don't agree with the way you portrayed that, at least at the first part of what you said, because I think we all know that many of these difficult discussions that we've been having amount to those situations when there isn't enough transmission capability. You have to choose which schedules flow and which don't, and that can have reliability implications for different entities depending on that decision. And so that's when it really matters. You get down to everything is a self-schedule at that point, for example, and there just isn't enough transmission capability to support everything flowing. There isn't a redispatch opportunity. A curtailment needs to be made. And I'll just note that the EDAM proposal addresses this situation explicitly in terms of describing that prioritization of curtailment. And I think that, you know, to assume that the market will sort it out is not good enough. We need clarity about what happens in these circumstances, because as I mentioned before, it's when it really matters the most. And that's what we want to be, I think, focused on, is making sure that the proposal works in those challenging periods.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Okay, we can go ahead. And Stuart, you still have your hand raised? Do you still have a comment on that?
About that, let me take that down. No, I think that was a good dialogue. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to Petter.
Lindsay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, in kind of response to Jeff's example, Jeff, is going to happen the same thing happens in Kala. I saw they had market with ETCs and TORs. You can have high priority for those schedules that you call back transmission, you call in the ahead. And then optimization will optimally dispatch and try to resolve double counting of transmission with first dispatching lower priority, non-firm, whatever. And then if it's not successful, it needs more, it will start optimally dispatching high priority protections. So there is no difference compared to how it works a day ahead today. And it's way, way, way better than in OAT with electronic curtailment calculator, which is very inaccurate. And the whole scheduling you're talking about OAT is also very inaccurate because you're doing point-to-point path-based schedules that are far away from reality and feasibility. So any dispatch, any commitment is a way better solution than that. And of course, you are absolutely right. You should be having high priority for self-schedules that are linked to firm transmission rights. But as I said, that can be easily handled in day-ahead markets. Thank
you. Thank you, Petter. Yep, go ahead, Jeff.
Do you mind if I respond to that? I don't want to take up all of the time, but I think there's something there that's worth responding to, that based on what Petter just said.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I think what Petter described there, or my understanding of it at least, was a framework where the OAT rights holder receives higher priority through the ETC functionality. And that might be the technical solution to this, But my understanding of the EDAM proposal is that's not what the proposal is currently. So I think that's the issue, is if the proposal was that by submitting that 100 megawatt transmission schedule day ahead, I could be assured of high priority as I update the energy deliveries in real time up to that 100 megawatts, and perhaps using that ETC functionality, I think that would be a potential resolution to this. But at this point in time, the proposal is, aside from the 30 megawatts scheduled day ahead, that remainder of transmission that I'm trying to set aside to enable delivery of my resource is not assigned highest priority. It's treated equally as the EDAM transfer. And that's what I'm trying to raise. That's why, the example I was giving is really focused on this example where you have a transmission contract to enable either variable energy resources or dispatchable facilities where you need the ability to increase that delivery in real time up to the transmission that you've set up on a day ahead basis.
Jeff, I agree with you. We discussed this some times ago when I was kind of not very supportive of using that not scheduled day ahead firm transmission and throwing it to, which is actually non-firm, throwing it as a firm in EDAM with everything else. But I don't know where CAISO ended up with the design. I think that's still the problem, that they have to maintain firmness of old schedules through the real time, and that people can recall back and have their priority protected in real time.
Okay.
Lindsay, I'm sorry, this is Doug. I just want to jump in. I think the proposal is to honor the ETCs and TORs through whatever the terms of their agreement. And so you would be able to increase your schedule in real time, and it would have the highest priority. So I mean, you still may end up getting some type of curtailment as similar to what you would get in the OAT framework. It'll just be an optimally or take into consideration the actual physics of the network.
And I think Kathleen also has something to say on this, so we'll let her speak as well. Great, yeah, and actually, I have a couple things, but I don't want to, just a note, and I think this discussion, one of the things it's highlighting for me is that there's a lack of clarity, unresolved questions, issues, details, whatever you want to call it, lack of clarity on how these types of like really fundamental questions about how the transmission would be subscribed as a result of EDAM, including for those who are not only making the available unsold transmission available, but for all the transmission that is already held by other entities, how those entitlements would be treated. But I think this has been very helpful for me just to highlight, because I'll say I understand that the proposal does not address this specific example, and I think the nuance, Doug, is that ETC and TOR and CVRs mean something very specific, and the eligibility to get that treatment is something very specific. And the example here, in my understanding, is only afforded to third parties that hold these transmission rights that want to schedule on them if they schedule 100 megawatts. And so one of the things, Jeff, my follow-up question for you, because I think this is so critical, is that's the guidance you're being given, right? You can have this priority treatment if you submit 100 megawatt schedule for that wind into EDAM, but only if you do that. Can you unpack why that isn't in the best interest of this supplier in your example to do that?
Thanks, Kathleen. I mean, I actually think that that's probably what the incentive would be if this type of issue isn't addressed. I think what it would lead to is a customer would effectively day-ahead self-schedule energy up to the maximum potential use of their transmission, which I guess from my perspective means that this current part of the proposal doesn't achieve anything because it would lead to the customers or the participants doing that. But I just think that that's not efficient because now you just have, instead of a schedule that's approximating the information at the time, you have the incentive to schedule it to the maximum potential delivery just because that's the only avenue to ensure priority. So it just doesn't seem like a very efficient solution to try to address this issue. I think it would be much more straightforward to modify the proposal in such a way that the entities that are looking to schedule their transmission rights have a means to do that, and that enables them to schedule their transactions of variable energy quantities in real time without having to take that step.
No, that's super helpful. Can we unpack that inefficiency a bit more? For me, in your example, I see inefficiencies not only for the EDAM market, but also in the RAP market. And I think that's really a critical thing for us to connect for folks in what you're describing, because I agree with you. The incentive here is, the design is you can only afford this priority if you schedule 100. So schedule 100 to retain your rights that you've invested in, go into real time. Let's say in real time, the megawatt amount I think you're showing is the ideas that you would, let's say it is, in your example, 50 megawatts. This wind is going to have to buy back in real time, exposed to a real time exposure, right? And that introduces a new risk to this agreement that it has sold in a forward process. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do think that's a possibility, that you would have some settlement implications of scheduling at one level and day ahead for means of establishing priority and then adjusting it real time to, the actual final delivery, as opposed to being able to do this in a more straightforward way. But I think just more broadly, it's inaccurate from a modeling point of view. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons it doesn't make sense to me. I gave the example of a single wind farm just because it's easy to sort of understand that, but you can think of all kinds of different transactions and different activities that this really doesn't make sense for. I mean, imagine a dispatchable hydro facility. You think of all the entities in the Northwest that have hydro. I mean, at mid-sea, there's probably 20 or more entities that have slice contracts of their hydro system, of the mid-sea resources. They buy out rights, they take their slice of that hydro system, bring it back to their load using those transmission rights. I just can't see a framework where you tell those participants, you have to schedule your output day ahead in fixed blocks. And that's all you can do. You can't move your hydro up to respond to variability in flows, otherwise you're exposed to curtailment. Or you have to schedule your hydro production at Pmax every single hour because you're concerned about this. That doesn't make sense to me. So I just think that, as I mentioned before, having a mechanism to communicate your scheduled transmission rights day ahead and have those respected will address these scenarios in a way that ensures that those dispatchable or variable facilities and contracts can still continue to function and be respected through the market dispatch.
I appreciate that. And what I hope to connect, and I appreciate where you're coming from, you sharing your perspective. What I hope is, what's really interesting about this example is it highlights not only how a supplier is impacted, how a transmission customer is impacted, but because it potentially increases risk, that this is how you have to participate in the market. In your ability to provide a forward obligation, it also shifts risks and costs into that forward space, which will impact buyers on a much larger monetary exposure for the forward contracts as well. So I just wanted to thank you for the example. I think it really highlights how every single participant in our in our in our universe is potentially impacted by this inefficiency. That's it. Thank you, Lindsay.
Kathleen? Go ahead, Mike.
Kathleen, can I ask you a question about that? This is Mike.
Sure.
I just wonder if you could unpack that comment a little bit more, because Jeff's example was a non-EDAM participating resource transmission through a EDAM BAA to an entity that's not participating in EDAM, so a non-EDAM BAA. So, yeah, I was just wondering, it just felt like your comment was a little bit more broad than just example. So I just wondering if you could maybe explain that a little bit more.
And that's fine. And I'm intentionally trying to kind of make this digestible for the group and kind of put some context around it. In his very specific example, this is impacting a supplier located outside of the EDAM. So let's say, let's call it SPP Markets Plus exists right next to EDAM, and we have a border. So we have seams issues. Like, this is a seams issue example. That's correct. You have a supplier that's located in Markets Plus. Let's say you have a load located in Markets Plus that has procured this wind resource in a long-term basis. The risk by which that could be curtailed in the solution, if it does not offer and receive the highest priority by scheduling on that risk increases the risk to the load. It also increases the risk on the supplier in the external market that is trying to schedule through EDAM, that both of them have risk. The supplier, that it will not deliver its obligation by being curtailed, and the load that is not going to get the service it has procured in the forward basis. And so by increasing the risks on those entities outside of the market, outside of EDAM, that will increase risk for them. And because of increased risk on the supplier, I would anticipate it would increase risks for offering that for the actual product that it is selling, because it has an increased risk that it will not be able to deliver it fully to its buyer. That is a very important seams issue that I think merits additional discussion. And so I appreciate Jeff raising that for the group. I think a similar concern, we could do this example inside EDAM as well, and it would pencil out similarly to buyers and sellers inside.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. I think just what threw me off was your use of participants when the example, and so I appreciate you explaining that.
Broadly. Of course. No, thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Kathleen, this is Doug Boccignani. I just wanted to respond though, because I do think that, like in this mid-sea example that Jeff described, not from the slides, you know, presumably those parties who have those resources have their transmission rights, and those rights, as I understand the EDAM proposal, would be respected, and the resource, you know, will get dispatched economically, or if it's self-scheduled, you could self-schedule it. And if you have the rights to schedule from one point to another, that will have the highest priority, even if you don't exercise those rights until real time.
Doug, there was
Yeah, Jeff.
It's Jeff Spires here. Just to respond to that, there's a section in the EDAM proposal that discusses this issue related to transactions that are scheduled outside of the EDAM footprint, essentially, in a way, the way that I outlined it in the example. And the explanation in the proposal is that those would be treated pro rata with EDAM transfers, not receiving high priority through real time. So that's what the genesis of this is related to. And I unfortunately don't have it in front of me, but I could probably refer you to the specific section.
So this is Pam, and I think this is really getting at the crux of one of those market design challenges that I think we're really facing. Whereas I think everyone on in this conversation has noted the value of the region moving incrementally towards additional organization and the benefits of being able to have a kind of wide area of visibility and coordinated dispatch across a broader footprint. And I think we, really need to advance some of these opportunities as we look to decarbonize and, maintain reliability as we see a lot of the thermal generation across the region retire. And I think these points are some of the trade-offs that we get in this middle ground between, the EIM and an RTO, where we need to be able to both maximize the benefits of participating in a robust day-ahead market and leverage the opportunities to really ensure that we're getting the maximum efficiency across the footprint generation. And I think there are a number of design elements that help reduce the likelihood that the scenario results in curtailment. And I think Doug pointed out redispatch. And I think another component is the requirement for participating resources to come with transmission, so that chances are the 70 megawatt transfer is also supported by someone's long-term firm rights or network rights for that internal EDAM resource. So I do recognize that there are opportunities here in the design to, that where the OAT framework runs up against the market framework, but I think there are components in the design that work to minimize those challenges and try to maximize the overall benefit of this market opportunity. None of these components are perfect. No market design is perfect, and we can always work, I think, to enhance it. But there needs to be certain balances in these design elements so that we can continue to make progress as a region across a diverse set of goals. Then I think EDM is one of those components.
Okay. Yes, I agree. This was actually a really good stakeholder discussion because I think it was clear that there were some misunderstandings in some of the proposal and and just how it all works. Discussing and talking this through, I think, is great. And it's clear that there's probably more discussion on this topic in the future. Is what it sounds like. So I guess with that, we still do have another set or another round for EDAM. So I'll go ahead and move things over to Kathleen, and so that we can hear from our next round of speakers. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I think that was great, and I really appreciate the dialogue. With that, I think we're still making good time. So our next four speakers are Scott Renzel, Mike Wilding, and Vijay Satal, and Mary Winking. So why don't we start with Scott? You want to go first, Scott?
Thank you. If we can switch to the next slide. I think there's an idea on this page, and I want to focus, given the previous discussion, on this is the idea of better. Perfect is an inachievable goal. And if that's what we're shooting for, we are going to fail 100% of the time. But to Pam's point, 8,755 hours of the year, we will all be better off with the idea of an extended day ahead market. And I realize the complications and importance of the issues around the other five are critical. They need to be made clear. They need to be made transparent to people. They need to be understood by people. But they are going to in putting two markets to a market and the OAT world together like this, there is going to have to be compromise in order to achieve better. And that is part of the sentiment that I will express today. We want to switch to the next slide. I think one of the things that I would point out around EDAM is really, this is again a trust step forward. We are putting two market designs together, and that has created challenges, right? The idea of the emerging RAP program and the existing California Resource Adequacy Program, as well as the extensive amount of planning and preparation that the rest of the states and entities in the West go through in order to ensure that they have sufficient supply, is critical for their balancing areas. And the extended day ahead market, I think, has done a good job inside the resource sufficiency evaluation of trying to be respectful, acknowledge, and understand how those programs come together, but on the day, on the hour, be able to actually meet what the needs are for that entire footprint. And I think that's an important piece of an element that has come to fruition and made extensive progress in our buildup of the extended day ahead market. I think another element that folks have talked about extensively is in order to have the resources, you need to have the transmission available. And it was a concerted effort inside the stakeholder process to make sure not only that we can achieve benefits, but that we can achieve reliability. And a healthy chunk of that comes through access to transmission. There's a cost and cost recovery component to that is critical. I believe it's been addressed in the way in which we address a hurdle-free access so that transmission is made available to the market, but that the cost components of that are also addressed and balanced with that. And I think that is an important step towards how we can move forward. Folks have talked about greenhouse gas accounting. There is no argument that it is a challenging area. I don't believe that the current proposal around resource specific is perfect. It is a base level of understanding for many of the EIM entities in California, and I think gives us a good foundation to start working from in order to ensure that we are managing and monitoring the emissions activities. Many in the West, including California, have objectives around reducing those, and our ability to work together to span a wider set of resources to incorporate more renewable and GHG-free resources will be a key component to many of the states' abilities to actually achieve that. That, again, does not discount the accounting, but it cannot be the enemy of the perfect answer. And I think we need, with any market design, to ensure that one thing we all acknowledge is we will not be perfect day one, nor will we be perfect day two. But as long as we continue to work together, we can move closer and closer to that perfection on a daily, weekly, monthly, regular basis. So I would say, I think the idea and progress that's been made in the EDAM space for an area that's been attempted previously in the West has been impressive. I know that there are other entities out West trying to do some of the same, and I applaud the fact that I believe it's pushing the whole concept forward, and the efforts around regionalization are important to many entities in the West. Let me move to the next slide. I want to reiterate the point that I had made previously, right? Market design is not perfection. Market design is a recognition of what exists today. And as has been talked about previously, I think the extended day ahead market, Pam said it well, does a very good job of balancing some of the challenges that exist in smashing the oat world and the existing CAISO market together. It is not perfect. It will need, a substantial amount of effort inside the implementation phase, as well as an extensive amount of monitoring and measurement. Are we getting the market outcomes and incentives that people need to work and understand effectively how to work inside this market? That would include additional resource procurement in the future, right? Not relying on the market, but continuing to come to that market substantially sufficient, but recognizing that on a certain day at a certain time, someone may fall short or a forced outage creates a scenario where your neighbors can help, and we should be utilizing that. That's utilized operationally in many of the field activities that folks in this industry use all the time, where you have a storm or, many of you are aware, we've had a lot of rain in California, and we've had plenty of operational support to ensure that the customers in California's lights stay on. It is appreciated, it is recognized, and there's appropriate cost and accounting for it after. That's what we need to shoot for in the market design that we're talking about here. I think that, I want to applaud CAISO, I think, to some of the concerns that have been expressed around how to manage a stakeholder process. I think other speakers have expressed it, but I think the CAISO did a good job of reaching out, trying to understand the concerns, really get into the market understanding and perspectives that various stakeholders and constituents hold, and trying to recognize and balance those in the design. It is no easy task, and I believe they've made a good set of progress forward, and I applaud them for it. And I applaud the stakeholder for community for actively participating, contributing. Having this robust dialogue has been instrumental in moving it forward, and I look forward to the fact that it hopefully continues in the future. I want to end with, I think the art of the possible is here. We need to be able to seize on that. We need to be able to move forward with that. I recognize it is not perfect, but missing that opportunity will have cost implications far beyond what I see as the potential risks that exist inside what we're talking about today. Thank you. Kathleen, you're on mute.
Just hearing me wax on, thanking you for volunteering. Thank you again for volunteering to share all your thoughts today. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much. Stick around for the peer-to-peer discussion. Next, let's go to Mike Wilding from PacifiCorp. And thanks to you as well. Mike, take it.
Yeah, thank you. And, a lot of the points that I would want to make and say about EDAM have been said, so I'll try to keep it short and not be too repetitive. But as folks know, and I think Russ pointed out, we did publicly commit to EDAM on December 8th. So just, about 12 hours after or less than 12 hours after the proposal was published, and, stayed up very late reading that thing. So, but appreciate the CAISO and all stakeholders work to get to this point. And for us, any discussion about EDAM and why we decided to make that public commitment really starts with EIM. I think over the last 9 years or so, we've really shown that EIM is a great benefit to our customers. As far as the dollars, we're going to surpass $3 billion of customer benefits here. I suspect when the Q4 report comes out, we've been able to avoid wind curtailments and solar curtailments, reduce emissions, all the things that we're all familiar with the benefits of EIM. And so when we looked at that, someone in the company that's much better at coming up with analogies than myself said, EIM is like going to your pantry to get your items for dinner and kind of picking out what you want from dinner from your pantry. EDAM's like going to the farmer's market. Much more options, have the ability to optimize, all the load, resources, and transmission. And, much like Scott was talking about, we are in a place where we have, PacifiCorp feels like we have an adequate and a good market design. And so we wanted to publicly commit to that, so that the CAISO and the board would feel comfortable with continuing resources into EDAM, and because we think there are benefits there for our customers that we want to realize sooner than later, and any delay in EDAM or any pushback in the implementation, we're just leaving benefits on the table for our customers. And much like EIM and the WEIM is not the market today that it was back in 2014 when just PacifiCorp and CAISO were in the market. We didn't even have a governance structure at that point. We expect, looking down the road 10 years, that there will be many changes in EDAM as well. and that will evolve as we gain more experience in EDAM and able to review data and make changes where appropriate. But we do feel like we are at a good starting point that kind of meshes those two worlds together of an organized market and an OAT framework. And then lastly, talking about EIM and making that incremental step from EIM, we think it is hugely important for the region for EIM to stick together. We think we've shown the strength of EIM through the benefits. Like I said, we pushed the grid to the brink a couple of times over the past couple of years. I know in PacifiCorp's instance, with the automated dispatch, we've gone from exporters helping our neighbors to importers in a single interval. And that's something that we could not have done without EIM. And so we just see any, detriment or any entity leaving EIM as a loss to the greater footprint and the greater good for the West. And so we want to keep that together, and we want to grow those benefits and move this forward. So I won't get into any of the details. I think that same day we also said that we were going to join RAP, and we've joined the next phase of RAP. We see these as interoperable. Obviously, there's some things that we need to talk about. Jeff brought up, I thought the conversation with Jeff was a really good conversation, and that really applies to all non-EDAM participants with OAT rights, and maybe not just RAP participants. But we're really looking forward to these next steps and moving forward in the process to implement EDAM.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Again, really appreciate it. Thank you for volunteering. Can we move to Vijay?
Yes, hello. Thank you, Kathleen. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Regional Issues Forum. I was going to touch upon two areas of EDAM that WRA has been engaged in partnership with our allies. We have submitted comments and everything, but the thoughts I'm representing here are primarily from WRA, but they do encompass the larger PIO, public interest sector, as we like to call, perspective. So I'm going to move to the next slide. How about this slide? How about something totally visual, a little bit of non-jargon here, but I think it captures exactly what happened in the last 1 hour between the transmissions conversation and the resource sufficiency. We all know Rome was never built in a day. We get that, but we are challenging you all in the EIM entity sector, in the transmission sector, in the load serving sector, and Scott from PG&E said it very well, that we have a big opportunity here. Let's work to improve it. So the public interest community and WRA especially says, get it right. But I think the goal is to move away from a bilateral status quo to what we would like to see is a full flow-based system. So all these deliberations, all these conversations, all the concerns that Jeff is raising, very valid, Mary is raising, others are raising, are all important, but I hope we can look to the long-term benefits and not stay mired and sucked in the short-term, what we see is the immediate benefits right now. I do appreciate and recognize, I give a lot of credit being engaged in the EDAM conversations to some of our partners on the call and some of the RIF liaisons when it comes to greenhouse gas accounting in some areas where the CalISO modeling protocols could be improvised, but that's part of having the dialogue that you are all having and we are having. I would like to just touch on transmission as a result. It was very evident from the transmission conversation earlier, though it was focused on the day-ahead market, but even in EDAM, we recognize the diverse interests. We recognize there are transmission right holders who would like to be paid. We also recognize that there are physical rights and they would like to be compensated. But having the ability to financially compensate for the transmission requirement is recognized. And WRA also recognizes that there is a desire for equitable treatment of entities that provide transmission. We are concerned and we hope that as the EDAM gets polished and improved, we can avoid any costs that impact participation. To Scott's point that Scott brought up is there are significant cost implications if we do this wrong. I want to throw the other coin to on the table is there are significant cost implications if you discourage participation and it reduces liquidity of open access for clean energy developers and new generators as well. So I hope we can keep market efficiency in mind, not just from what is currently workable and what should be improved, but what can be workable and improved over time, and what would increase the footprint of this market and hopefully to a larger RTO conversation as well. In terms of transmission provision, I'm going to let you see these slides a bit, but I'm going to give you the bottom line soundbite. If you didn't know about breaking news from Salt Lake City, Utah, is we want a glide path to a fullest and efficient use of transmission in the EDAM. We hope we can see this to be free of pancaking in time, and nothing happens well if you don't see what's happening. So we would like to see robust reporting on market performance across greenhouse gas accounting, across transmission, deliverability that I understand many of our stakeholders in the EDAM conversation are very interested in. These are, of course, reflected in our comments as well. I'm going to touch on greenhouse gas accounting, where I think I have about 2.5 minutes or so, at least. So on greenhouse gas accounting, WRA had initially really strongly supported ideally a consumption-based approach, but we recognize the CalISO approach that they have taken with some added improvements to capture leakage and address those issues. We encourage that path to go forward. We actually would really hope there be some stakeholder initiative to evaluate this in the next year or two at the earliest. We strongly recognize the concerns around the net export constraint, and also have recognized some of our partners on the call, in fact, notably Western Power Trading Forum, Kathleen, and some others who raised some concerns, and Jeff, of course, on the deeming issues. So I hope all of that gets addressed or captured over time, even if it's incremental progress. Speaking of progress, we want to share some work that we've done that will marry up and hopefully help this dialogue of EDAM with other markets in the West, because we would like to see a West-wide decarbonization happen, not just a state-focused policy compliance that the CalISO EDAM framework is very focused on right now. I understand states matter, but I think a West-wide decarbonization would be equally valuable. So what does that really mean? WRA and clean energy advocates are endorsing for a strong set of robust reporting metrics that can capture what CalISO is proposing, energy transfers that reflect carbon intensity, better coordination of reporting practices, and we really hope for a one-stop platform that all the participants, all the utilities, all the energy customers can go to one place to access post-dispatch profile data. We have done some work in this matter. We have interviewed and met with many states. We have met with state agencies and energy buyers, and we have some clean energy buyers interested in this work. And we've also reached out in the past to WPTF, and we're hoping to build on this work and identify some straw man metrics in the summer to provide back to day-ahead market operators for their implementation in their market reporting protocols. To that end, I would like to close by saying this. It's very simple. The states want data and information from the markets like EDAM or SPP Markets Plus on how you will verify and comply with our policy goals. I commend CalISO EDAM staff at CalISO for working on the leakage issue and trying to reduce it, if not fully eliminate it. But I think we also need to look forward to making sure that market changes and improvements will support multi-state coordination, recommend robust reporting, and think forward to even greenhouse gas seams. That will be a strong possibility to manage for, just like transmission-related seams. And I encourage and welcome all participants to reach out to us if you're interested in one-stop coordination for data reporting access, so we can really look to the larger system-wide footprint, just like Mike Wilding just spoke about the motivations for Pacificorp to join, or the reasons that PG&E has highlighted as well. So that's it from us, and thank you. Or rather me.
Thank you, Vijay. Really appreciate it. That was very helpful. Very succinct, too. Got through a lot of content. Good job. With that, can I ask Mary Winky, would you like to take the dive?
Sure. Thanks, Kathleen. We can just jump right to my first slide. The next one. Go ahead, one more. There we go. Thank you. So I'm going to try not to, I'm the last speaker, so everybody's probably getting ready to have some time back and get to the discussion. So I will try to be brief. And try not to repeat also what others have already said. You know, I think we think that a well-designed day-ahead market is expected to be beneficial. I think this is moving in the right direction in the West, and working through some of these issues is important, and for both kind of a reliability, economic, and renewable integration perspective. So I am going to focus on some of the challenges we see, and again, this is sort of a little bit getting back to the question of, you know, that I think you asked, Kathleen, at the beginning, sort of what do you see on the horizon, and I think that's kind of what we're starting to focus on. And I think the discussion today really does highlight some of these challenges in terms of trying to implement a day-ahead market without sort of going all the way to the RTO, so that you are retaining some existing balancing authority and transmission framework. And I think the way that the conversation is going, and a lot of people have mentioned this already, is really this question of themes, and sort of how are you managing sort of the themes between, you know, the bilateral market entities who are still utilizing their existing alt rights, and then contributing enough transmission for the market to be viable economically for those who are participating in the market. So I do think that a lot more, maybe it's a little bit of plug for like risk future conversations, because I think this conversation has been really great and encourage more of these kinds of conversations. So, you know, conversations around themes where maybe entities who aren't necessarily participating in the market and can engage in conversations around what some of those issues are. You know, also the Markets Plus conversation obviously is going to require coordination on themes. So I think really encouraging a lot more conversation around some of these themes issues, and understanding, I think, more about, you know, how frequent are these issues? Are they really edge cases, or are they really happening frequently? You know, what is the sort of magnitude of the issue? I think of some of these issues, I think it's be really important to understand going forward as EDAM is implemented. You know, we do think that resource adequacy is going to continue to be a challenge. This is sort of also in the themes bucket as well. But without a common resource adequacy program that has the same footprint as the market, and where you have even maybe similarly stringent requirements, but different penalty provisions, different penalty pricing, people making their decisions based on sort of different metrics, I think can create challenges with trying to sort of, you know, make these programs work together and make them interoperable. I'm not sure if that's the word. But I think, again, a lot more discussion on sort of making sure that RAP is successful alongside EDAM, I think is very important. And then I do want to talk a little bit about greenhouse gas. You know, there's a couple of components to this one. Arnie, I think, talked a little bit about some of the kind of economic disadvantages that Vistra is looking at in terms of the current approach. I think similarly, it's critically important for, you know, resources for resources to be considered according to their environmental attributes, consistent with the, you know, cap and trade programs that have been put in place. And there's trade-offs with that. And I think there's going to need to be further discussion around that, and how some of these, how balance is really struck on kind of the program implementation versus potential kind of market or efficiency impacts that, you know, those trade-offs tend to exist. And I think I actually think we only kind of scratched the surface through the EDAM process. As sort of, as in-depth as those conversations got, I think they probably will warrant further discussion to really understand how the greenhouse gas solution is dispatching resources, and how and whether the environmental policies of particularly California and Washington with actual pricing programs are being met. So I think it's going to be a critical focus in the future. And the other issue around the greenhouse gas proposal is how that solution and how market development will eventually dovetail around states implementing all of their policies. Not just necessarily Washington and California pricing programs, but other states that have clean standards and want to have an understanding of, what resources are serving their load. I think there's going to need to be a lot more dialogue and collaboration across states, across stakeholders, in the context of CAISO and EDAM, and also in the broader sort of Western context. So I think, and Vijay, I think, highlighted already some of those issues, agree with what he's sort of talking about, greater levels of collaboration and coordination. But I also think they're really important too, from just an openness from this group to have those further conversations and recognize that they are important from sort of a market efficiency standpoint, and being able to achieve those decarbonization goals, as cost effectively as possible, which I think everybody can support. But then we also need to make sure that states are comfortable that their policies are being implemented appropriately. So there's a lot there, I think, still to unpack and have conversations around. And more data is going to be good, and flexibility from stakeholders and market operators and states to really kind of dive into that dialogue. So I will stop there, and happy to engage in any kind of continued peer-to-peer conversation here in the next 20 minutes.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Mary. I really appreciate it. I will ask folks from the audience, if you'd like to ask any questions or share your perspectives on any EDAM, on any of these topics, please raise your hand. If you have a question you want to put in the chat, please do so. In the meantime, I will start with a couple peer-to-peer moderator questions, but please do raise your hand so we can try and get some of other participation. But let me start with, I'm going to start with the greenhouse gas topic first. That's what we kind of touched on last. I heard both Mary and Vijay touch on transparency, and I know, and I'll say, and again, another disclaimer, feel free if you're on the participant panel anywhere, feel free to jump in and participate, so don't feel restricted, but I'll call on Mary and Vijay first. Both of you touched on transparency. I heard, Vijay, you said that word. Mary, you hit on data and getting more information out there. Can we unpack that? How important is it? Well, first of all, do you feel like there is enough information for you, especially maybe Vijay is a good question, the public interest sector, trade groups, you're not participants inside the market, but you have a vested interest in it. Do you feel like you can understand how the market functionality works in EIM now, where you'd like to see the same practices replicated for DAAD? Or do you feel like there is a greater need in transparency that you would like to see? And if so, what do you want to see? Vijay, you're on mute.
Thanks, Kathleen. Part of the answer is in your very question that you asked. If we compare to the EIM, we had to give a lot of exemptions to the EIM. It is a balancing energy market within the hour. So you have literally within the hour resources that are dispatched and transacted. So there's a good chance of unspecified energy being used. Welcome to day-ahead market. You have a lot more predictability. You're planning ahead. You're planning your resources. You're planning at a certain price points. So you have a good sense of what kind of resources you want to bring to bear, even if they're self-scheduled or not. So I think now you are dispatching and leveraging customers, ratepayers' assets in ways that really has implications in knowing, are we truly using clean energy resources or not? It doesn't matter, even if you're using fossil fuel by a higher proportion, it's a good onus to customers and ratepayers and the clean energy advocates to better understand how is the utilities participating in a day market, leveraging their footprint and their resources. So that's a pure fundamental need for better information that, like EIM, we don't get state level comparison. A lot of the EIM emissions data is reported in state commissions and closed docket proceedings. The good news with day-ahead market is there's a higher degree of transparency because it is a larger step of a much larger set of energy contracts that's going to be leveraged and dispatched. So those transactions and those transfers would be valuable to be visible. That's all I can say and why it's important for us.
That's great. Mary, do you mind leaning in harder on this? So you mentioned data information. What kind of information do you think we're missing or would you like to see?
So I think that what would be really helpful is to not only identify more data that we want to see, which to me, when I think about, okay, what data is available from the market, you're really talking about what emissions are resources that are participating in the market producing, and in what location and in what interval, right? I mean, that's what I think the market could tell you. And I think there's probably a lot of conversation to have around, you know, when and how data is made public. But I just think that and that data is available publicly, you know, when it's reported ultimately, which tends to have somewhat of a lag on it. But ultimately, it is publicly available data. But having that data available on a more granular basis, location-specific basis, I think could be really interesting and increase everybody's awareness of kind of how the market is functioning from a footprint-wide sort of emissions perspective. And my understanding is what the CAISO currently does is really looks at like EIM emissions, which isn't necessarily fully representative of kind of what's happening in the whole market footprint. I also want to be really clear about what data I think we need to sort of agree is not available, or is not empirically knowable, if you will, right? Like increased transparency is not going to tell us which resource served which load. It might tell us information about proximity of resources and loads. It might tell us, you know, there might be ways to sort of review the data, sort of glean that and make some educated guesses on it. But at the end of the day, you know, I don't think the market operator is going to be able to develop an algorithm that says, you know, this particular resource served this particular load. And that more granular data isn't going to tell us that. We should recognize that any kind of a solution that does assign resources to load is based on some set of methodological assumptions versus empirical sort of observable data. So when I'm really talking about more data, it's really about more of that sort of measurable data, if you will, versus something that you are sort of cranking through an algorithm or using a set of assumptions to allocate or derive emissions to loads, if that makes sense.
That does. That's really helpful. Let me call on Arnie Quinn. I see your hand raised.
Kathleen, I'm really happy you asked this question, and I completely, you know, absolutely agree that the first step of this is more data, and I think the point that Mary made at the back there is also a super important point to appreciate, which is all the data in the world isn't going to ever be able to tell us definitively that a resource was deemed to be delivered to California that wasn't delivered to California. And so I think my follow-up question is, so we've got the data, we've recognized the limitations of what that data can provide, and where, you know, and everyone on the conversation, I think people did a really nice job of articulating a recognition that this is not perfect and perfect can't be the goal. I guess my question for the folks that say, hey, this is good enough and let's keep going is, where will the pressure come once we have the data and additional transparency, recognizing that we'll never be able to say with any certainty, you got it wrong, that resource didn't deliver to California. Where will the pressure come to fix things that we think are broken based on that transparency and that data? And you know, what my worry is the people harmed by the GHG accounting not working well are emitting resources inside of California and potentially deemed resources outside of California that are clean and are, kind of being accounted for as providing energy to California, but not really getting any compensation for being a clean resource that provides, they're clean and their clean attributes are beneficial to California, but they don't get anything for that. So, where does the pressure come to fix the problem once we have the transparency, once we have the data?
Yeah, that's a great question. Mary, did you want to take a stab at it? That'd be great.
I mean, the answer to the question, Arnie, is I don't really know. So I'll just caveat that and speculate a little bit. I think the challenge, right, is that you have the need to compensate, non-emitting resources for their attributes. You have the need to not discriminate against in-state versus out-of-state resources. And it's functionally it's both a state policy and federal policy question. And I think, where you're gonna have, movement around this issue is if states really see that their policies, are not being, faithfully implemented in the market. But I think that's a really challenging dialogue. It's a challenging interface with FERC and making sure that market principles are also upheld. So it's a really sticky wicket, and I think it's going to probably take a lot of stakeholders coming together, frankly, to gather information, have more of an accepted sort of perspective on some of these things. I think maybe that's kind of where it starts. But I don't know, open to your ideas on that. It's a challenging one.
Quick response there. I think Mary captured a lot of perspective from the state side, but Arnie, there is another avenue is if we get good data, and I really like, Mary, your terms empirically knowable. That makes a lot of sense. You don't want to force data to come out. That makes no sense. But if we can get data that really appreciates the carbon footprint and where the footprint is yet low, high, that doesn't make sense compared to the state requirements or price signals, that's exactly why the independence of the governing body is also to be leveraged. There is a market independent expert being hired by the independent governing body. So bringing information to them and raising the awareness there is another avenue or toolkit in the box. So just want to highlight that from a governance side of the perspective. So not everything can be handled at the state's level, but what is a market operator design problem? We bring it back to the market operator and the governing body.
Great, thank you to both Vijay and Mary. I see Jeff's hand up. I'm gonna let Jeff jump in the conversation.
Thank you, Kathleen. Jeff Spires with PowerX. I just wanted to support this notion of increased transparency on GHG. I think it's badly needed. PowerX, as well as others, but we've been certainly vocal in expressing our concern that the EIM algorithm is dispatching emitting resources to be imported into California and labeling them as hydro on a regular basis. And we've obviously had lengthy debates about the merits of extending that approach into EDAM, which is something that we are concerned about. We think that GHG pricing and GHG accounting needs to be functioning across the West, regardless of which market you're in and whether there's multiple markets. It's important to be seeking the right outcomes on this topic generally across the West. And we did an analysis last year using the data that we have access to that led us, that supported our what we felt was happening and led us to be more confident that these inaccuracies are occurring. But we only have so much information. I think transparency with the underlying data is long overdue and is necessary for all stakeholders to have a really good grasp about what's going on in today's world and what the potential ramifications are in EDAM of extending on that or changing it. It's very difficult to have a dialogue about what the right market design choices are when there isn't a common starting point around what's going on today. And I do think the data is there, granted to what, Mary was saying, absolutely it's not practical to assign individual resources to loads or something like that. But that being said, I absolutely do think the data is there to evaluate what is the underlying resource mix and the emissions associated with resources that are being incrementally dispatched when California is importing in the EIM. And that type of information could be compared against what the deeming is showing to be able to ensure that everyone has a good understanding of the inaccuracies of that approach and then can weigh in armed with that information about what is appropriate in terms of EDAM moving forward. So I think this is a really important topic, and I'm very supportive of the concept of detailed transparency on this issue.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate that. Stuart Kelly, can we unmute Stuart's line, please?
I've never really commented in GHG before, but let me comment here. I think to Arnie's question, I think the pressure will come as states move towards their zero carbon goals. You'll probably see requests for, different states looking for zero emitting resources so they can achieve those goals. And I think EDAM already contemplated that. I think, as Jeff says, there's a lot of data there, and I like this aspect of, looking at the underlying mix that's getting dispatched. But I think my hypothesis here is you just have to move away from deeming it, particularly as different states employ their various GHG programs. And I think then the question becomes, how do you adequately compensate a non-emitting resource? Do you let the market forces play out, or is there some other mechanism? But I think the EDAM design, I think that's contemplated within the proposal, will and needs to evolve. And I think, my hypothesis is you'll be in a continual state of evolvement until you move away from deeming. And as it's currently contemplated, I don't think you'll reach your long-term goals without some changes. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. And if you don't mind, let me just a follow-up question, because, a lot of those online may have participated fully for the stakeholder process, but we might have some new participants. And so I know you have provided your own proposal on how you think that, GHG should be operated. I just wanted to make sure that you had a chance to make sure to share that with the full RIF, because it's a new entity, and connect that, if you don't mind. Is what you're saying about feeling like we need to maybe move away from deeming, was that the why behind why you went through the effort of kind of putting forward a proposal?
Yeah, I think it was a couple of areas. We considered the long term. We considered, folks like Mary and Jeff raised concerns around deeming. We appreciated what CAISO had done, in terms of improvements with the reference level and the various constraints, and recognize that that's a step to, addressing some of the concerns. But really, as we contemplated it, we felt that the best balance is struck with moving away from deeming and having a load-based accounting approach. And we also felt, as we consider the broader element of retail customers or whatever, that's probably the best solution. The rest, we recognize there's no perfect solution, but we certainly recognize, things need to evolve in this space. And at the same time, we need we're open-minded in terms of, appropriate compensation for non-emitting resources, and don't want to see, seams getting created that disadvantages, resources, be it in or out of the GHG state. So much work, I think, needs still to be done in this space, but I appreciate, CAISO's efforts in trying to move it forward, but this is definitely not the last we're going to here on this topic for sure.
That's great. And, you know, we appreciate your efforts. I know a lot of those that have already spoken have been really engaged in this topic. And I really appreciate the way that the stakeholder community, the RIF kind of members have participated and really jumped into this space. So I wanted to acknowledge that and thank y'all for your contribution. Stuart, you still have your hand up. If you don't mind lowering it, just so I know that you don't have anything else you want to add, that'd be great. Let me just do a quick check-in before I ask another question. Do we have anything in the chat?
No, nothing in the chat.
Am I missing any raised hands? I don't see anything else, anyone else. So let me kind of shift the topic. I think this is a great conversation on the greenhouse gas. Hearing transparency, information, and need to work on it kind of resonating. But how do we keep that commitment and that momentum? Those are good questions. So maybe we'll try and take that back as a riff and see if about continued conversations. I heard Mary ask for that, so we'll take that feedback back and discuss further. Let me ask a question, kind of shift to another SEAMS issue that was brought up on the first couple speakers, Scott and Mike, on so we have the California RA program, we have the RAP, and of course also Jeff, you and some of the earlier speakers teed this up, Arnie, Jeff, and others are jumping to mind about the themes around resource adequacy within the EDAM footprint. So we have a California RA, we have RAP, and then maybe we have some areas that are participating in neither. That brings up some challenges. I wondered if we could unpack that a little bit more. And maybe, Mike, if you don't mind, if I can kind of ask you to jump back in on this one. You mentioned that we need to continue dedicating resources into EDAM, and this was one I felt like you spent more time kind of talking about complexities and challenges. If we were to spend more time on it, in your mind, how do you want to see that happening? Is that another phase of EDAM? Is that implementation? Can you expand on what you were thinking?
Oh yeah, that's a good question, and you know, we've got 2 minutes, so I'll do my best. Yeah, no, I think as we move through implementation, you know, definitely when I said we want to have resources continue on EDAM, it's moving from the design phase to implementation. And then I think just like we were talking about earlier with the DAME initiative, you know, and we have to continue to monitor all of these things that have come through the design issue, including the resource sufficiency evaluation for all of those reasons that you said, Kathleen. And, you know, when it's time and it's apparent that changes are needed, we have to, you know, be nimble to make those changes. And I think it is important for the EDAM to be able to evolve as we gain experience in the market.
Great, thank you. Lindsay, would you like to ask anything else or touch on anything?
No, I'm good. Yeah, this was great discussion. I mean, there's so much I feel like we could still discuss, but with time, I actually don't have anything. Do you, or should we close it out?
Let's just ask one last time. I got any participants would like to just send last parting thoughts on the topic before we close out?
I just want to thank Kathleen, you and Lindsay for doing this and setting up this event and offering a chance for an open dialogue for everybody. That'll be my 1 cent. Thank you.
Thanks, Ajay.
Yeah.
Hearing none, I'll pass it back to you, Lindsay. Thank you all.
All right, I will close out today's discussion. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all the speakers for volunteering to provide your perspectives today. We recognize this is a pretty big lift in such a short amount of time, and additionally, thank you to all the stakeholders for this robust discussion. We hope this was useful in gaining new perspectives, and that's all we have today. So have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.